microphone. Hello, I need to turn my microphone on so you guys can actually hear me. I'm Jason Bosch, and I am here with Allison, who, let me turn her microphone on so we can hear her. All right. Hello, Allison.
Hello, everybody.
There we go. Um, okay, great. So today we are showing part 5, which is the final part of the interview that I did with Allison on May 20th of 2020. And we're also taking your questions. And I'm going to do things a little bit different. I'm going to try to keep a cleaner, like a little bit cleaner housekeeping. And I hope you guys are don't get mad at me. But one of the things I'm always trying to watch um, the chat for questions. And then a lot of times there's these conversations that happen, and a lot of times the conversations aren't even related to what we're talking about. And also, sometimes trolls get in there and they do tricky things. And so I'm going to keep a little bit cleaner house today. So I'm requesting that the chat on YouTube, if we can reserve that specifically and only for specific questions or comments to Allison and I. And that way it'll be a lot easier for me to keep track of things, and then I can focus. Sometimes I can't focus on what Allison's saying because I'm over here trying to weed out all the questions and comments. So we would like to have your questions and also your comments. If you have comments that are specifically related to what we're talking about, we don't want to just kind of veer off into other directions. We want to kind of keep it focused. And even if you have like disagreements to say, well, I have a kind of a different point of view, and here's why, we're certainly welcome to hear that, and we'll hopefully have a good discussion again today. And let's see, Allison, do you have any things you would like to start off with today?
I don't know. Why don't we just save it all for the end?
Okay.
Does that work?
Yeah. So we're going to show this episode, which is about 40 minutes long. And as you're watching, try to think of questions. And the questions don't have to be related to the specific interview, but we do ask that your questions are related to the work and research that Allison does, because sometimes it goes off the rails. So thanks again, and thanks again, Allison, for joining me. And we'll see you in about 40 minutes.
You had mentioned some key dates or things to talk about. Time frame, the National Broadband Plan was, I believe, 2011. And so that had chapters on each of these things like education and healthcare. And it really talked about like creating new avenues and commodities around the digitization of these services. So, it's really important to understand that this infrastructure for capital flows, is running through the telecommunications, is running through the FCC, and it's companies working, federal government working hand in hand with the corporate interests. So the corporate interest, that plan was to advance broadband and essentially to run our life through broadband. And in Philadelphia, we're the home of Comcast, right? So the two largest skyscrapers in the city are Comcast, and they built the second one. And I'm like, I point that out and I say, oh, they built that second skyscraper to channel our life through it. And it actually has this like glowing finger. It's kind of like a middle finger sticking up. There's like one looks like a thumb drive and one looks like a middle finger to the city. So yeah, so that's Comcast, Comcastic. And the other piece is, in terms of legislation, the piece that set up EdTech and this idea of badging was Executive Order 13111, and it was Bill Clinton. And I'm trying to remember the exact year. I think I don't know, it might have been 1999. So this executive order essentially set up what's called the Advanced Distributed Learning Program. It also set up a task force to talk about using technology to train all Americans for lifelong learning, okay? ADL came out of the military, so it's very important to understand that the educational technology space is inherently, from the beginning, a military space, always has been. It came out of the Department of the Defense, and this idea was that distance learning was useful for the military, for people in naval submarines who needed to learn new software programs. And that not only was it great for the military, but that it was great for all federal employees. And in fact, it was just great for all Americans. And so this advanced distributed learning program has 4 regional offices. There's an administrative one in Alexandria. There's one at University of Wisconsin-Madison, which is the academic one, but it also has a lot of gaming. There's one in Memphis, which is workforce development. And then there's one in Orlando, which is military, but that's also gaming. So all of these systems were set up to talk about how do we use technology to train the US population for lifelong learning, which, well, it sounds great, like you think of very like, hey, we can learn our whole life, right? Like our brains don't dry up like when we're 19 or whatever. Like it sounds good, but what they really mean is reskilling for a global gig economy. Like that's their lifelong learning, is us to continually be remade as human capital and continue to chase jobs that will be going away because they are automated, and then be reskilling again. And then understanding that the hedge funds are betting on the reskilling part. With the success metrics will very likely be acquiring the badge, acquiring the credential, not actually getting employment, right? So we'll just be collecting our chits and our skill credit badges in our learning lockers, but we'll never actually get to do the work, because by the time we've got the skill, the robot's doing that job, we got to do the next skill. And then the hedge funds are just on the side betting on whether or not we will comply and get the damn badge. So that's like the game that we're in. And it's really interesting because I will say, like a number of years ago, I was lobbying against these high school exit exams in our city council. I was in City Hall and I saw our council president, who was my city council person, Darren Clark, and I was saying, you know, these keystone exit exams are a terrible thing. You know, they really don't represent what kids can do. And he's like, well, you know, we need them, and we're an eds and meds economy. We're going to be eds and meds. And I'm like, oh, eds and meds, right? And so what happened though is what I've realized over the last few years is, like, you hear eds and meds and you think like, oh, they want a bunch of teachers and healthcare workers, right? Like that's eds and meds. It's an economy of eds and meds. No, I'm pretty sure what they mean is we are to be processed by eds and meds. We're not the processors. We're the product. We will be managed as chronically ill people. We will be managed as chronically underemployed or unemployed people through the educational systems that are being set up through digital platforms and through digital systems that are telemedicine and also teletherapy. So there might be a few people running the platforms and monitoring the data analytics, but increasingly all of this stuff is going to be automated. So eds and meds is not what I mean, maybe they're actually believing what they're saying, but understanding the system, it means that we're just going to be the raw product to be processed through in this sort of post-Fordist world by these technological systems under the heading of education and healthcare, which are those UN Sustainable Development Goals. So a lot of what's happening now is connected to debt, not surprisingly, and student debt. The Lumina Foundation is connected to this, which is based in Indianapolis, is a debt company. They're very much involved in the push for competency-based education. This debt will start to manifest in new forms, and one of these new forms is called the Income Sharing Agreement, or an ISA. And there's a model in Purdue, it's called Back a Boiler, where you have someone invest in your education and you agree to share a portion of your income with this person, like over time. But only certain types of degrees are attractive and get certain amounts of, there are contract deals set up. And this will likely happen through blockchain, these blockchain ledgers. And so there's an organization called Institute for the Future, which has a series of little videos. One of them is called Learning is Earning, which talks about learning on blockchain. And then there's other videos that talk about income sharing agreements. They're very short clips. But in the income sharing agreement one, it was a young woman who was debating getting a virtual reality degree or a degree in Chinese because, you know, one she could self-finance and one she had to take an income sharing agreement with, but one paid better. And she was like debating in this video which she should do. So we have to know about the reskilling programs, the debt programs, that Lumina is connected. The other piece of this is understanding workforce development, that we're moving towards under the Workforce Innovation and Opportunity Act. that I believe was 2014 that Obama oversaw was a shift towards planned regional economies, which is something I don't think most people are aware of. And I mentioned that earlier, that our southeastern Pennsylvania WIOA plan anticipated the high growth areas were mostly gig economy and very low wage jobs. What they are putting in place is this idea that within certain regions there will be designated job opportunities, like 6 or 8. And like if you're living in that region, like that's what you're trained for, which is kind of incredible that that would happen here and that people really wouldn't be talking about it. But these jobs and the skill codes for every job are connected through something called ONET, which is tied to the Department of Labor, and it's this computing system in Raleigh. So this idea that all these jobs have skill codes and that the codes will be mediated probably through algorithmic systems, through welfare to work programs, most likely. Again, all feeding data analytics and labor market analytics. Like that's what this EdTech model is feeding into an economy where labor is redundant. People will be profiled from very early ages onto certain tracks, where access to jobs, like I don't know what happens if you move out of your region. Like I used to think like, oh, well, what if you're trained up in southeastern Pennsylvania and you want to move to the Bay Area? But I don't know, maybe in pandemic we're not allowed to move anymore. Like maybe we never get to leave our region. It is Hunger Games and we're just stuck in our region. Like I was like, oh, what does happen? Like here are your 8 jobs that you can do in southeastern Pennsylvania, and there's like only 2 overlapping jobs in the region you want to move to. Like it's very incredible, but this is real and is happening, and all of the workforce training boards are aligning to this. So there's a letter that's really important to read. Mark Tucker was connected to the National Center for Education and the Economy, and he was part of an organization like the Alliance for Restructuring Education that got its start in the late 1980s. National Center for Education and the Economy was the early 90s. He wrote a letter to Hillary Clinton when Bill Clinton was elected to the presidency, essentially outlining the intention of U.S. Chamber of Commerce interests to remake the national workforce program in a way that was aligned to this apprenticeship model and a planned workforce development model. And it was read into the congressional record a ways later, so you can actually read the letter, the actual letter, which is really vital because at this point, what we're seeing in workforce-based learning, competency-based education, skills badging, profiling students from these early ages is all embedded in this letter from the mid-1990s, and that's so we're here. Like, and it's called the Dear Hillary letter, and it's advanced by many on the conservative side because it was a letter, and she didn't ask for this letter. It was merely like sort of their assertion of the Chamber of Commerce of how they should proceed, but in lockstep. No matter what presidential administration, we have been continuously advancing. And so that now what we're seeing is something called adoption of the Swiss model, the Swiss apprenticeship model. In Switzerland, you have to understand, is the home of blockchain, the Zug crypto valley, and central banking. I think people think Swiss model and they're like, oh, we can be a pastry chef. It'll be great. Like, I love apprenticeships. It's great. Like, we don't all have to like go to 4-year college, which is true. But essentially the jobs are going to be linked into these very limited workforce options determined by regions, and will very most likely be aligned to STEM careers that support the fourth industrial revolution, those goals, which is the primacy of STEM, science, technology, engineering, mathematics, and building the virtual world, I think, and securing it through cybersecurity. That's what they want people to do, and that's what people will be forced to do through these lifelong badging programs. ADL, Advanced Distributed Learning, was integrated with something called IMS Global, which is the badging system. And these badges, early on, there was something called SCORM. I think it was like the Shareable Content Object Reference Module, which was an early learning management system. That's how you interfaced with like an online learning system like Dreambox or something on a laptop. But that technology didn't work for non-computer based. It didn't work on phones, and it didn't work on tablets, and it didn't work on wearable technology, and they needed to capture especially behavioral data beyond the limits of the traditional learning management system. So SCORM was sort of built upon, and I think it's being sort of set aside now, with something called XAPI, or Tin Can API, which allows for the capture of information and uploading to learning lockers from wearable technologies and these other systems, like from phone-based learning. And this is all, again, embedded in military training, but not just military training. And so the XAPI is based on something called, like, it has a noun verb object, and it essentially reduces education to something like, I did this, I read this book, I accomplished this level in the martial arts game. You know, I caught 3 fish and I took a picture of it with my video camera and uploaded it. Like, every life has to be reduced into this box of the noun verb object, and that is what XAPI is. And my feeling, and I haven't proven this, but it seems very consistent, that XAPI will be linked to these Ethereum smart contracts, both for payment processing and credentialing. So you'll be like, I went to the rock climbing wall and I got certified that I got to the top of this skill level. And then you, like, I did this, and that goes in your learning locker, and the rock climbing wall gets paid, you get the skill, and all the data gets tracked, and the investor who is investing in your physical education, like, gets paid back. And it's all on the ledger, and it's all very trusting and very transparent, and essentially we become like pawns in their video game world. And we're not in control of the video game world. We're just told to, we're given a path, and we got to be on their path. Yeah. And so this is where I think, like, the liberation aspect comes. I mean, that's the Freudian, like this is being imposed by an anti-life engineering militarized force across the world. This isn't US versus China. This is us in solidarity with the Uyghurs, in solidarity with the Palestinians, in solidarity with the families in Boa Vista, the families of North Philadelphia. We all, the people who are being dispossessed off their lands in India, we're all in this together against this system that would seek to reduce our lives to fit in this I did this box to profit hedge funds. And knowing some of the hedge funds are betting against us. Betting against our health, betting against our education, betting against our well-being, betting against our housing, betting against all of it. They will say that they're just betting for us. But for every person betting for us, there's somebody betting against us.
Heads I win, tails you lose.
Yeah, right? But people don't think of it like that. They don't know the history. They're caught up in the partisan nature. And, you know, I will say, like my values are understanding this is a problem of institutional structural racism, of genocide, of human capital finance, of all of these things. And I'm sure, like, which is not to say if we get beyond the part, like, that I'm in agreement with all these other people, but I'm sure many people out there would want to fight this and not share those values. Those are my values. This is the people I want to stand up with. And this is who I want to ally with. So, sorry.
One of the things I think a lot about, assuming that everyone had good intentions, including Bill Gates and everyone, they really just want to make the world a better place, which I don't think that's the case. But let's just give them the benefit of the doubt that that's the case. I think a lot about, like, Hegelian dialectic. And so there's this relationship, there's a conversation, you know, the thesis, antithesis, but together it creates a synthesis. And I think about the Hippocratic Oath. First thing they say is do no harm. Yet we have a system that does immense amounts of harm for profit, and then we're going to come in after the fact and then remedy some of that harm with some of the profits that are made from that system. And together you're creating a synthesis, that there's a relationship, there's a direct relationship between the harm that's being done and the supposed good that's being done, that is your thesis and the antithesis, but together it creates a whole. And the idea of coming up with solutions that circumvent or completely step outside of that that dialectic. That was kind of I don't know if that's a question there, but like, I guess it was more of a like, what are your thoughts on that kind of idea? Like, is there a better way to approach these? Again, because I'm like coming at this from, let's just say Bill Gates has good intentions. He's going to make a bunch of money doing damage through Monsanto and all this other shit, but then he's going to do some good, assuming that, giving him the benefit.
Well, they're
of the
creating
doubt.
markets, right? I mean, the markets. I wrote a post that kind of riffed off of this Twilight Zone episode where the aliens come in and they have this book and people are not sure what to make of this book, and at the end the aliens convince most of the folks it's all good, and they're getting on the spaceship, and the woman who's been working really hard to crack the code to translate this book, because eventually the cover of the book, it says to serve man, right? And they're like, oh, these people must be awesome to serve man. And like at the end, like as they're getting on the ship, she's running out going, wait, it's a cookbook, And that's how I feel, is that these markets are fueled on misery. And we live in a world where there is enough, where there could be abundance, but our systems, imperial systems of domination, are invested in militarism and in extractivism and causing these terrible damages. And those of us who are living sort of in the belly of this beast, and we have caused grave harm around the world, and we're part of these things like the World Bank and structural adjustment that are continuing to cause this great harm. When we're in this moment, of climate, the environment is being devastated, and we need to make a different choice. I mean, those of us who see it have to make a different choice, I feel like. And I think the dialectic for me is that, and I think I mentioned it before, but it's this idea of this life force, that there is this very direct life force that the technology wants to channel it into their circuits and harness it. It's like damming it up, this water wheel, like to use it to power things for their benefit. And that the antithesis to that is an open, flowing system that, in its power of flowing through these interconnections, like continues to build more power, like by feeding off of each other, like supporting one another, as opposed to channeling things off into all these separate little boxes and holding it hostage. And I don't know if that's the right way to see it, but I do feel like there is a spiritual element of this, and I think it sits at the intersection of like physics and mathematics and spirit and faith, which is an interesting place. And I just a couple years ago I read it, and then I gave a copy away, so I got another copy of A Wrinkle in Time, which is a book I read as a kid, and it's about this journey into sort of other dimensions with guidance from outside beings, and they talk about the Tesseract, and which is sort of this way of transporting into different dimensions. And what they're up against is something called IT, which is technocracy, really. Is that at the end of the book, that's what they're up against, and the only thing that can come up against that is love, and in the end, love prevails in a way that. And, the book is very much about physics and math and love. So I feel like I don't know how it's all going to play out. And this is, I'm just on this journey. I just thought I was fighting standardized testing. I thought it was going to be one thing, and it was like something very different. I never thought about, cyborg evolution, where these crazy people seem to think things are going. But I take a lot of hope in that, like, they don't expect a lot of people to confront them on this. The ripple effect that small groups of individual people can have is pretty profound. And I look to see, like, even in the lead up to this the situation now, like over the winter, the stand that was taken by Wet'suwet'en Nation, you know, in the lands that are called, you know, British Columbia, like against those pipeline companies, and these women, these mothers and grandmothers in ceremony against these very powerful forces, like rippled out across Canada and into the US and their allies, and having that strength of spirit and fortitude in the face of something and is very inspirational. And I think that is something to tap into. And I will say, and I don't know, I know you're not that political about things, but I've been looking for the answer, because for a long time I just were like, let me tell you all the horrible things. And people are like, oh, Alison, with all the horrible things, you know, and it's like, it is kind of depressing. And I'm like, and I don't know what the answer is, because, you know, I don't know how to build the answer by myself, because it has to be a collective vision. Like, I can't just say, and here's my answer, because like that would be totally the opposite of everything I'm saying. Is that there is a group called Eco-Socialist Horizons that has developed a 500-year plan that is land-based and indigenous-centered, and they're looking to try to heal the earth from this stuff.
I'm pausing it for a quick second just because I want to say something. So like, I've been kind of torn. Sorry guys. I've been kind of torn about how to deal with the chat, because in the past I've gotten some trolls, and then I'll post some like coded thing that I don't know what it means. And so I'm always challenged, because like I want people to have a conversation. But I also like want to keep the trolls out, and I also want to keep it focused on what we're actually talking about. So today I was going to try to do it where we only took your comments and questions in the chat section. But I'm torn, because I want you guys to be able to share your thoughts. So I'm going to kind of open this up a little bit, but just if we could just stay focused. And if I do delete your comment, because I think it might be directing us misdirection or something, I apologize. But so I guess I will just open up the chat to whatever. But I am going to try to monitor it a little bit. But yeah, please add your questions or comments too, because that's really what I'm looking for at the end. And those that have already added those, I do see those, and we will ask those at the end. Thanks.
And they you know, so I think there are people out there who have ideas about what to do, and we have to realize there's not going to be any quick fix. So the life of those of us who are already, you know, I'm 51, whatever, you know, I don't know how much time I have left, but if I can use that time to be in struggle in some positive way towards that end, like, that's the best I could do.
Yeah. It's funny you mentioned Wrinkle in Time. I read that when I was a kid. I don't really remember it that well, but they just came out with a movie that I think Oprah Winfrey produced, which is like,
yeah, I know.
Oprah is like, you couldn't get more.
Well, she goes to the Robin Hood galas. Yeah. Yeah. Well, the thing is, but you need to hijack the thing. Like, that's the things. You know, and you see it over and over again, is that when things push the envelope, they get pulled back in. They get pulled back in certain ways. And I have to say, like, where things are moving right now with the virtualization of the real world, the gamification of the real world. I mean, the gaming industry, the video gaming industry is a huge part of this. Epic Games and Fortnite, you know, they want to take over education, so everyone will build ostensibly what they say is their video games, but I think what they really mean is the next world.
So what's their involvement, Epic Games and Fortnite? You want to just say a couple words
about
what they're doing?
So Epic Games, one of the major video game companies, is based in Raleigh-Durham. They came to Philly in 2016 during the Democratic National Convention, and were at an event I was at. The Atlantic Magazine was hosting all these different talking things, and it was about education in the creative economy. And they had Suzanne DelBene, who's a former Microsoft congresswoman from Washington State there, and this woman who is from University of Wisconsin-Madison, who's a big gaming person, who's now at UC Irvine, I think, and one of our council people, and the guy who is the president of Epic Games. And essentially this talk that was ostensibly supposed to be about education in the creative economy was about how to get kids trained up to build their video games, which was kind of strange, you know, to think about that. And it took me a couple years to realize it wasn't actually the games, that they're planning for us to code the virtual world, like the world as a game. But the company, even though it's based in Raleigh-Durham, a little over 40% of it is owned by Tencent, which is one of the largest companies in China. And they have their own social credit scoring system, and I believe WeChat Pay, like digital payment systems and gaming economies. And they were able to scale. Fortnite is a multiplayer warlike video game. I do not play it, but I understood it took the world by storm. All these little kids, like tiny elementary school kids, were like up late into the night playing these war games. And that game was essentially scaled with Chinese capital. And then what Epic Games has actually done is they've created beyond their gaming something called the Unreal Engine, which is a software platform that allows for the creation in real time of like virtualized experiences and almost synthetic people. And so they're sort of franchising the use of this Unreal Engine for a lot of different programs, everything from like advertising, but also to education and healthcare. They're like, it's great, we'll just have synthetic people. So they're collaborating with Disney. And so as we're moving into these worlds where we're not sure what's real and what's not real and who's a human and who isn't a human, and there's humanoid robots, there's humanoid avatars, Facebook is rolling out these, new avatars, we're virtualizing ourselves. Like we need to understand the role of the video game companies in the virtual world space. And also there's an important piece, which is the Institute for Creative Technologies, which is based out of USC. And that was created in the late 1990s by the US Army Research Lab and a guy who was one of the head designers for Disney. And they've collaborated to essentially on virtual simulation. Because they're like, how can the entertainment industry work really well with the military? Because we both really want to do simulation. And so for the last 20 years, they've been refining technologies to create virtualized environments and synthetic people. So, and as we interact with synthetic people, especially in like therapeutic settings, educational settings, like it is not clear how much behavioral biometric data is being pulled in, how that's going to feed markets in human capital and predictive analytics on people, predictions about people's mental health, how it's going to feed into policing. Like there are just many, many like ethical things, especially when like fundamentally it's funded by the Army. The Army and Disney, go figure, right?
Yeah, sounds pretty good, huh?
That was bad, Mickey Mouse.
So if you think about capital, like where capital lives, and the foundations are a piece of it, and the foundations are using their assets to catalyze these markets, because right now the markets can't stand alone. So they use the assets of the foundations to underpin the markets until the markets can take. There's a chunk of money in pension funds, right? So all of these EdTech situations that are essentially going to start replacing teachers with online platforms are backed by the leadership of the national teachers unions. Which sounds kind of bizarre. Like, why would the leadership of the national teachers unions be backing platforms that are putting human teachers out of work? But if you understand that like TIAA-CREF and SEIU and the teachers' pension funds are going to be investing in the human capital, like that those pension funds need the community schools in place to invest in all of the human capital wraparound services and invest in the high impact learning technologies, that's why the union, like we're not able to count on union leadership at all to resist this program, because they've already signed up for something called Education Reimagined that happened several years ago. So the leadership is all on board, and the rank and file union members just don't even know. The other piece, there's a big chunk in insurance premiums. So the big insurance companies have this big chunk of capital to pour in. So a lot of the healthcare systems like Kaiser Permanente and companies that are invested in insurance, they're going to be, like you're hearing about insurance companies investing in pay for success supportive housing, because they'll say, oh, look, we're offsetting chronic illness by providing housing. But essentially they're going to create housing that are data pods. So there's insurance. There's sovereign wealth funds, like the Saudi Sovereign Wealth Fund. That's a big one. They're investing in a lot of impact investing opportunities. But then the Vatican Bank is actually a major player in this space. And it's important to think about because the Pope actually has very close connections with Microsoft, and Bill Gates is a practicing Catholic. And I'm not anti-Catholic, I'm just saying faith communities with large endowments will be major players in this space. And many of the entities that are a lot of ed tech and digital identity systems are operating out of Salt Lake City, which is one of the ARPA nodes. But there's a lot of money in Latter-day Saints money holdings for these impact. And the religious groups would like nothing more than to say they're doing well by doing good and both manage society according to their behavioral pathway that they deem fit. So the Vatican has held 3 social impact conferences in coordination with the Mendoza Business School at Notre Dame. And Piero Midyar, Tom Steyer, they've all been in on this mix and setting up the digital identity systems. And many of the impact opportunities that are advancing are happening through the Jesuit universities and the Catholic Relief Services specifically. So the Philadelphia Federal Reserve Chair, Patrick Harker, he is a Wharton professor, but he was also on the board of Catholic Relief Services. So that they are based in Baltimore. And I sort of say this going in, talking about like what does it mean if you're put on a pathway that has a faith-based component, right? That may or may not align with your own personal belief system. There's a lot going on in Baltimore. So Johns Hopkins is in Baltimore. Johns Hopkins has very close ties to public health, these vaccination programs, Michael Bloomberg, state surveillance, the NSA, a lot of that is going on with Johns Hopkins. Also, Catholic Relief Services is based in Baltimore. The other big entity that's based in Baltimore is the Annie E. Casey Foundation. So Annie E. Casey, when I was looking at it, at their board, which is how I sort of do things, is like, oh, who are the people that are connected to this? The vast majority of people on their board were all tied to UPS. And I was like, well, that's it. Like, because usually boards are a little more diverse than like having half the people tied to UPS. Well, it turns out the Annie E. Casey Foundation came out of UPS money. The man who founded it, he founded UPS. His mother was a single parent, and he was very involved in foster children. And so the Annie E. Casey Foundation is very much connected to UPS. And they actually were the ones who created early on, I think it's the Mission Investors Exchange, which was one of these early social impact exchange programs. And catalyzed a lot of the impact investment market and sustainable development, business development market. They're also very Catholic too. And they also have this foster care component, which is a target for Pay for Success. So it's just important to know these players. The Annie E. Casey Foundation interfaces with Strive Together, which is the collective impact program out of Cincinnati. But in thinking about like tracking, right? Like UPS is really good at tracking things. Right? Like ensuring delivery and supply chain. And really what we need to envision is that blockchain identity systems and being processed, whether it's through education, whether it's through healthcare or some other system, is about supply chain tracking. Like human beings are the supply chain. So I think that's most of it.
That's interesting.
And you wouldn't think, like that's Annie Casey Foundation is not one of the foundations that like comes to mind immediately, but they're very important to this in this space.
Well, and it seems like Amazon is another one that's got to be playing a huge role in.
Well, you know, they had that, how much money? $100 billion, like this investment in homelessness, right? A couple years ago, and pre-K, and they were going to do Montessori preschool, right? And it sounds great, right? Like the Montessori brand is like, oh, that's what the rich people send their kids to Montessori pre-K, right? But essentially what Montessori is, it's great for impact investing because it's individual, right? It's the individual person going off and doing their individual things in their own self-directed way. So there are Montessori pre-K programs in the Boston area. It's a franchise called Wildflower connected to MIT, where they put Internet of Things sensors in all the kids' slippers, and they track them around the school. So that's like the human capital piece. They're like, oh, but we think social relations are important. So we'd like to track all of the children, see who they talk to, see how they interact with the teacher, see what part of the room they're in. Are they playing in the block area too long? We can put them all on the dashboard and make sure that they're engineered properly. And that's what these Bezos Montessori schools are very likely going to be.
Crazy.
It is crazy.
What would you say to people that are watching this, that just, what do you think people should do, or like what would your appeal be to the world?
I think we have to fight to be out of the panopticon. I think we have to resist them wanting to make us into a commodity, a data commodity. I think the goal will be to frame liberation as that we will sell ourselves, and we will, if we are just really good at branding ourselves, that we will come out ahead against our neighbors. And I think that we need solidarity. Like, we need to oppose digital identity systems. I will say, I don't think I mentioned before, but at the national meeting of the NAACP last summer, they passed a resolution opposing linking blockchain identity to any public benefit system. Okay, so that was passed at the national meeting in Detroit, opposing linking things to SNAP and housing, or tying it into incarceration or any of these things. And I think that's really relevant right now with these blockchain potential health passports. So we need to stop digital identity. I think we need to stop 5G. We don't need a world where humans are redundant. And we need to understand this not in a partisan way and not in a nationalist way. Right now, it is the masses of humanity against the billionaires. I'm wearing a shirt, Poor People's Army. I organize locally with the Poor People's Economic Human Rights Campaign. They have been working on welfare rates. They do not take outside money, and it is led by the poor. And I am allied with that because I believe that this system is coming after all people, and we have a lot to learn from people who have been resisting these systems of domination for years and years. We need to stand in solidarity with one another, and we need to do that. We need to understand that our struggle is the struggle of people around the world. And I'm sitting here as someone, who has the benefit of mostly owning a home, having somewhat stable employment. But I can see where this is heading, and where this is heading is towards anti-life. And so I think if we can be very clear about that, and I'm sort of appealing to all the people who care for liberation and care for people who are the vulnerable among us, and I'm trying to appeal to the Berrigans of today, like the liberation and people who are willing to put like peaceful hearts forward in a very insistent and direct way, and to challenge these authorities, because I believe that our spirits together are very powerful things, and that we can join together to do this work. And I'm under no impression that it's going to be some quick resolution. If it were, we wouldn't actually be addressing the problem, because this problem is tied to the doctrine of discovery and is at least 400 years or more in the making. It's not a quick fix, but it's the work that has to be done. So I guess just putting a call out to all those who see that work. I think addressing the 5G situation, stopping the fourth industrial revolution, stopping digital identity are the key pieces that I see as the levers that we need to engage in right now.
Okay, great. We are back, and Allison is back with us. Hey, Allison.
Hello.
So we did get a lot of questions and comments, that is great. Thank you guys for doing that, and feel free to keep sharing those. I will be collecting them. Before we start with the questions and comments, Allison, I like to always just ask you kind of your initial thoughts after listening to this. I don't know if you've listened to this since you did it, but is there, what's changed? What hasn't changed?
I don't know, Jason. I think we're still pretty spot on.
Yeah.
Actually, given what we wanted to talk about today, the little extra piece, it actually segues really, really well. I was like, that really worked out super good in terms of context. So.
Yeah. Well, on that, actually, so you had posted a couple videos that I thought were worth discussing. One of them was of Charles Eisenstein, who actually I filmed. I co-hosted an event with him years ago, and I have his book back there, Sacred Economics, and I've always kind of liked his work. But as my understanding of things grows, you start to question even a lot of the people that you were formerly following, and so like he had, basically what had happened. I don't know, should I just play the little clip? Is it long enough? Maybe, I don't know if it's too long. I actually
It's
brought
just
it up
like
here.
a minute. So
Yeah. Okay. Let me just grab it and bring it up. I could have swore I had it. Where is
I know I sent you a lot of links.
it? Yeah, I have it here somewhere. Let me just grab it again.
Okay. Well,
But
essentially, I would say, like, I spend a lot of time listening to other people's stuff, not because I don't respect their stuff. It's just there's so much. And so there are people out there that consume and synthesize a lot of people's things. And for me, mostly what I focus on is my own lines of research. But occasionally people will bring some things to my attention that are like, like this is this is problematic. So this is someone who brought this to my attention, who actually does really detailed, in-depth work in the nanotech space, and like said, hey, this is a problem. Like, listen to this. And at that point, that's why I was like, I spent the time to listen. And so I just in framing this, my point, what I try to do is like use what people say and then add my analysis of it or shortcomings of it. So it's not meant to be an indictment of this person as a whole or a character issue. This is not a reflection broadly, but I would say the media is managed, and sort of I found this statement, especially at this stage of the game, where we really understand a lot more about compositions of injections and nanoparticulates and various things, highly problematic. And so what I'm saying is not to bring someone down, but at the same time to say, like, we need to actually hold each other accountable, because I get a lot of feedback. People don't know all the things, Allison, just like wait and let everybody come along. And I'm like, no, actually, we need a horizontal movement, and we need everyone to educate their people. So if you have a hero and your hero is like off base, then it's your responsibility, if you know better, to bring them up to speed. So anyway,
yeah.
you want to?
So I found the clip. So I'll just play. It's about a minute long.
They often tend to jump at any narrative that gives expression to their authentic.
I'm not hearing it. I don't know if
sense
other people are.
that there is something going on behind the scenes here that isn't what we were being told. So like there was this thing that circulated a month or two ago about Pfizer's new patent that patents, nanobots in the human body activated by 5G, et cetera, et cetera. And people in the counter narrative space were accepting that uncritically. I mean, I went and actually looked at the patent, and it didn't say anything like that. It was basically about contact tracing. It was still disturbing, but it wasn't. So like then when people make that claim about it, they make themselves look ridiculous to the other side. And it widens this divide, which is the real crisis of our time. It's a crisis of the word, of communication.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
That was one of the most powerful parts of one of the essays that you were writing.
Okay. So FYI, Allison, everyone could hear it. You're on a different channel. So I had switched it. I just hadn't forgot to open it up to you. Sorry about that. Yeah. So my initial thought when I heard this was just like, it seems to me like there's a very focused thing where they were like, hey, it's this one patent. And he's like, that doesn't relate to it. And so then he used that as an opportunity to dismiss everything within that, underneath that umbrella. But
Ridiculous.
it's ridiculous to anyone that looks at any of this is ridiculous.
Ridiculous.
Yes. So do you want to just talk a little bit about that?
Yeah. Well, and I would say people who listen to me actually from a certain perspective, like I continue to say, this is so much bigger than the house space. Like we need to zoom out and actually maybe if finding common ground is important, right? Like being able to reach into people who maybe have a different mindset about this. Like there are so many infinite numbers of issues that we could talk about beyond the house space to start to bring people together once we understand it as human capital finance and extinction of natural life on Earth and the turning of everything into a digitally twinned video game. There's a lot of ways that we could actually reach across, but the framing of that essentially to say, and it could be that sometimes people misread patents, right? I don't think his tone was that in misreading the patent, they looked ridiculous. It was in asserting concerns around nanotechnology and activated 5G. That was ridiculous. It wasn't just that. It's ridiculous that people might misinterpret some legal document. It was the content, really. And so to me, at this stage of the game, people need to be set straight on what actually is going on, because it's, you know, there's like a mind contagion. Like, I agree, many times people share unconditionally or without thinking things through on their own. And I would say everyone, it's incumbent on everyone to be mindful of the media you're consuming. Be mindful that, you know, there's a lot of money floating around on both sides, you know, like sheepdog, you know, herding people on both sides into a certain narrative. And think critically before you share. He has a point. You should be thinking critically before you share material. But at the same time, the dismissive nature of concerns around nanotechnology with what we know about bioelectronics, the Internet of Bio-Nano things, among others, is, I think, highly problematic. And I left a number of comments on both of their Twitter feeds. It's interesting, this person, Aubrey Marcus, or Marcus Aubrey, I can't remember, the host, the podcast host of this particular, with Charles Eisenstein, that, you know, he's based in Austin. We're like, it's like, we were just in Austin. All of this stuff is happening in Austin. Like, he has this huge palatial home in Austin, and he's, you know, they're all going along with the dismissing of the nanoelectronics. So, anyway, I'm not saying this that like you just dismiss the guy wholeheartedly, but he needs to be set straight on this, because if things go without intervention, that causes harm. That causes harm to clarity around the movement. And if you can't tolerate those issues being raised, which are substantive issues, like I keep saying, like, then I'm not your gal, you know, move on to a different channel. So anyway, that was my Charles Eisenstein intervention for the week.
Yeah, there's another piece of that too, this has come up before, is the idea that we can't have division. We all need to be united. We need to create a front, and we've had discussions about this, but you know, I'm of the point that having clarity and making sure we're focused on the actual problem is actually far more important than having large numbers of people that have very different understandings of what it is we're dealing with. And I like to bring up the time of slavery, where you had the anti-slavery, the abolitionists, and then you had like the progressives at the time who were like, hey, we can't stop slavery, but let's pass some laws that are, you know, that says their master can't beat the slave, and maybe we could raise some money to send some back to Africa or whatever. And those are pretty serious differences that I think they're irreconcilable. And so the abolitionists were pretty staunch, and they said, you know, absolutely not. There's no room for slavery in this world, and no matter what the odds are against us, we are in this fight to end slavery, which still has never ended, even to this day. It's just not legal. Overt slavery. We have other forms, but well, of course, prison
And I would
labor
say,
as well. But anyway, go ahead.
like, just in that frame, like, if the frame was, I know that there are lots of people who are asserting gain of function and bioweapons and all of that sort of thing. So if his position was around that, in contrast, looking at nanotechnology and frequency, like, I can respect a difference of opinion. Like, I can respect, like, I hold my own opinion pretty strongly and the rationale behind it. But it wasn't a robust conversation in that way. It was a dismissive conversation. And so I think that's the thing that and it's oftentimes within these narratives, it's about controlling the narrative. And it's just sort of a slight in passing. But those things build up over time. And anyway, that's why I thought it was worth raising. But yeah, I mean, there are two, it's kind of like the same thing. Either we're going to live under the tyranny of the electron microscope, or we're going to like look into the nanotechnology and frequency. But they're sort of separate. Like, you can't either both believe in the bioweapon framing and gain of function and believe in sort of a terrain theory environmental poisoning. It's you kind of have to figure out where you are in the space, and it's not easy. Like, I'm here to say it's not easy, but you actually, the goal is clarity. I mean, that's you know, coherency. That's what I always bring up with John Trudell. It's like clear, coherent thinking. Think coherently. And then if you see someone who's not thinking coherently, intervene. And we can all do that, right? Like, we can all do that. There really are, in my in the world of my imagining that there are no heroes, no one is above other people, like no celebrity is above other people, like we're all equal.
Right. And with the impact investing and the blockchain identity as part of markets, like that is massive. That like there you cannot, if you're going to do you're going to protest mandates or whatever, and you're not going to address this, you're really missing the boat here, because this is what it's all for. This is what it's all driving us towards. This is the what's the book? Stakeholder. This is the stakeholder capitalism where we're policed by DAOs and AI and it's all automated and policing each other, and like it's anyway, you can't leave that out, and I think that's Allison's frustration.
Oh, you can try.
Well,
you can try to leave it out.
Well, so many people do, and it's like at a certain point, I get your frustration. You're like, come on, people, like this is the thing. This is the thing that we're moving towards, and so
impact investing into nanotechnology. So
right.
it's those are the two things. It's using the impact data to drive the AI machine learning, and that is done through the sensor technology, which is, turning robots into people and people into robots like that. But that is happening through the synthetic biology space. So that's why it cannot be dismissed.
Well, and I also think it's hard for people to wrap their mind around. They're like, oh, like transhumanism, like that's like movie stuff. But, like to actually think that like that is actually not that far off where we are merged with tech. I mean, and you can clearly see with the research that's being done, with the policies that are being created, with the books and the what they actually say that they want to do, is it's not just science fiction anymore.
Well, yeah, I've been spending like a couple days this week like mapping, because I've been really looking at post-war Japan and the role that I think played in the occupation of Japan, and then the reconstruction of Japan as sort of a capitalist buffer against China during the Cold War era, and corporate, crossover in the electronic space, and the work on humanoid robots, that went back at least to the 1960s and 70s. And then, I was working specifically on a conference called Humanoids 2000, which was at MIT with the Japan Robot Society. So for 21 years, they have been working very intensively on humanoid robots. These are not industrial robots. These are not industrial robots that just live in a factory and are used on, in car manufacturing. These are literally robots that are supposed to face with people, which I don't understand why you would want to, in a world where you're supposed to be sustainable, essentially like limit living people and then start adding more and more robots. It's really strange. But that's been ongoing between like MIT and Georgia Tech and Northern Iowa and, all the universities in Japan for a long time. They've gotten pretty far, and even to the point of having, like at Duke University, there was a trial of having electrodes in the brain of a monkey that they trained to walk bipedally, like upright on two legs with sensors on the leg, that they could track with the AI and then link that around the world in Kyoto University to walk a Sarcos robot, animatronic robot at Kyoto University. And this was a few years ago. So again, it's Duke. This is licensed, elite universities that are advancing what sounds like mad scientist technology, that a living being halfway around the world would, through their mental processes, be operating telepresence robot. And that robot Sarcos was set up by with DARPA funding out of the University of Utah, and it was initially run through Raytheon. These are serious, like we're talking, and now they're selling like robots as a service. As we put everybody else, human people, out of work and under surveillance for these data pods, impact investing. So this is all super serious, even though it sounds science fiction. It sounds ridiculous. I'm sorry, Charles. It may sound ridiculous, but it's actually happening. And so I could send you some white papers if you want them.
Well, no, it's okay, Allison. We have bioethicists. So like Fauci's wife, we have people making sure that this is all ethical. Don't worry about it. We're good. The experts.
Yeah.
And then the other piece I wanted to just real quick mention here, and then we'll get to your questions, was you had a little, I don't know if I would say a tiff, but like a little disagreement with Glenn Greenwald, who actually
She was trying really hard to ignore me.
So Glenn's another person that I've actually admired a lot of his work in the past. But he had made a comment. Well, I don't know exactly how it got started. Maybe you can explain how it got started. But he made a comment on Twitter about like, this is ridiculous to think that philanthropists would be helping poor people for profit. And I'm like, there's a long history of that. And do you understand what social impact investing is? So Alison, you want to kind of set this up and explain what happened here with Glenn? And I want to just preface this, one of the challenges with challenging people that people admire is it becomes a personality thing, and we don't want this to be a personality thing. That's not what this is. This is actually based on content and whether or not someone's actually advancing understanding of what's going on. So Alison,
yeah. Well, I would say I was similar. Like when I'm working on a blog post just to document it, because I feel like in many respects, my job is to remove plausible deniability from people. So I could say when, like, they can't at some point say, we didn't know, because I'm like, I tried to tell you, like, here's the documentation of how I tried to tell you. So, early on, I watched Citizen4, which, I was sort of, I'm the activism, and I seen, Laura Portras's documentary on Snowden, and Greenwald is a central character in this, Greenwald, and I was totally bought in. I was totally bought in, and then I started following the money with my education research, and I realized, actually, it was an event at the Philadelphia Free Library where Snowden did a simulcast, and Jeremy Scahill of The Intercept was the facilitator. And so I was very excited. I talked to him about EdTech and surveillance and all this stuff. And afterwards, someone pointed out, they're like, what about Omidyar Network? And I was like, that's right. And I hadn't really done my homework before. And what I realized is, like, Omidyar Network owns The Intercept, like, full out. It wasn't like Omidyar Network, like Pierre Omidyar gives some grants to The Intercept. He literally owns it, which was Glenn's longtime employer, he's since left, but many, many years. And so once I realized that Omidyar Network, which is advancing good identity, digital identity, microfinance, EdTech, social entrepreneurship, social impact investing, specifically targeting the global South, but also, low-income communities worldwide, that he was behind this. And I'm like, well, The Intercept is never going to cover the problems of surveillance and educational technology, because Pierre Omidyar, that's what he's setting it all up. Like, this is not going to be an issue. The Intercept can cover many other issues well, but they're not ever going to touch on this. So that was sort of my frame of like, okay, so this isn't all what, like, the Snowden leaks were intercepted. The Intercept is an intercept, in and of itself. And so I was more critical, but that's a learning process. We all have to go through these learning processes. So what came up, I'm not sure how long ago, within the past couple of weeks, is that it was announced that Jack Dorsey, formerly of Twitter and Square, a tech billionaire, was funding the construction of a rec center project in Rio de Janeiro in one of the favelas. And Glenn Greenwald's husband is an elected official there, left-leaning, I think socialist. And there was concern within the socialist community about the use of essentially sort of billionaire neoliberal money flowing into this project. And then Glenn Greenwald was very affronted by the whole thing. Granted, I will say some of the critiques were inappropriate. They were homophobic. They made insinuations that were inappropriate. And then a number of them, like, were concerns about this outside money from the global north flowing into these communities and the amount of transparency and accountability that was connected to the project, which I think in some ways he did address. But the elephant in the room that was not addressed by anyone besides me was, where is this project in the context of social impact investing and human capital finance in Brazil? Because I had Brazil on my radar for the past several years, looking at IO2 Foundation, which is also known as Shanzai City, and they are a key player in linking digital identity and conditional cash transfers, which are essentially like UBI. It's going to be the precursor to that. So like subsidy payments to low-income families, linking it to home visits and like essentially digital surveillance of low-income people tied to early childhood education. And so the mayor of Boa Vista, Brazil, which is a rural area, it's not in Rio, it's in a different part of the country, but they actually attended this event in 2018 in New York City around early childhood investing and human capital finance that was sponsored by Ready Nation. And at the time, it was like in the fall of 2018, they rang the NASDAQ bell. They were like, we're so excited that people are actually, capital is investing in early childhood and workforce training opportunities. And this is all linked to digital identity and impact markets. So I'd had Brazil on my radar for quite some time. UNICEF was involved in this, and we know that like once UNICEF comes online, like they can scale it through their innovation fund globally very quickly. And so I was trying to press this issue. I was like, Glenn Greenwald, where do you stand on social impact finance? Can you just make a public statement? Like it's not strictly about this project, but clearly if his role was in the he gave an interview later with someone, his name is Andre Domis, I think, who's like a Marxist I believe it sounded like he was in Toronto, Canadian, came from like a Jamaican family. And so they were having this conversation. In this conversation, like essentially Glenn Greenwald was like, well, after the framing of this was that there had been a mass shooting by the police of residents of this favela under the guise of like coming in and, you know, bringing, you know, rogue actors in, but like it was done indiscriminately. It caused a lot of harm. It was state violence and acted on this low-income population. And it was where Glenn Greenwald's husband, Dave Mirandola, I think, like grew up. And so he had these connections. And so he came in and he said, we're going to sort of help this community. What do you need? How about this rec center? Why don't you put together a design for this rec center for the youth because they don't have anything and the state has abandoned them, which is true, right? Like, I mean, it's a favela, like the state is missing in action. And then Glenn, he says that he regularly goes to these very affluent Silicon Valley people with requests for financial support, and that Jack Dorsey of Twitter and Square, now Block, offered to fund the construction of the program. And it sounds like there are several programs, like they have, this isn't the only one, they're going to build several. And so the build out was like, how could one ever question this charity for these people who have been abandoned by the state, by the billionaire class? And how could anyone imply that there was a way for money to be made at this? Which to me is shocking, because Glenn Greenwald, I mean, he advances himself as this very worldly individual, very knowledgeable about geopolitics. How could Glenn Greenwald not know about social impact finance and human capital investing? I mean, I can understand maybe he doesn't know all the nuts and bolts of it, but if someone raises this question and says, well, what about digital identity in Brazil? How is this going to be linked to potentially out of school time, education training, workforce training of what they call opportunity youth, which are youth like 16 to 24? Because if you understand, like I had gone over in my talk, that they want the youth to code the metaverse. And they especially want Black and brown youth, in my opinion, to do that coding work. They want, because on the one hand, it's a great social impact opportunity. And on the other hand, symbolically, it's like severing this tie to the natural world of people who are more like have this cultural connection to life, and making them code the counterfeit, and making it sound fun, like a video game, which is very Ready Player One. And then I would say too, in the favelas, there's such a concentration of population that once they create the impact markets, they can scale them pretty quickly and actually get quite a big impact on the data dashboards that we're talking about, to create these profit centers and to create the gaming. And you know, Rio is a smart city. They're advancing a lot of surveillance networks. Ready Nation has a footprint. Actually, Aspen Institute had done a a mapping of social impact investment opportunities in Brazil in 2014. So quite some time ago, they were already mapping out what the opportunity space were for the investment markets. And Omidyar Network, who at the time was Glenn Greenwald's, Pierre Omidyar was Glenn Greenwald's employer, was a party to that research that Omidyar Network was doing. I mean, that was being done in Brazil, that Aspen Institute was doing. And then another player in the space is actually Stanford. So Stanford has a special focus on education entrepreneurship, targeting Brazil specifically for EdTech development. And then, you know, they're layering in programs around social impact finance and education, and specifically like programs around digital world building and the metaverse in 2015. I mean, it's, you know, in Second Life. So this stuff didn't just show up. And so what I was trying to pressure Glenn Greenwald was to say, if you and your husband are essentially soliciting money on behalf of this program, which again, he's framing as that communities have a say, but again, does the community have informed consent? Has anyone talked to the community about what this landscape of social impact finance? Because I sort of frame it as like, it's like, you know, the local drug dealer, right? Like you hooked, and, you know, maybe with free or like low cost drugs, and then they reel you in. And that's what this predatory philanthropy does. It's not right. And none of this can be ignored because it's right in your face. And I provided many, many links, none of which he responded to. And in the end, none of it was discussed in the interview, which I clipped. It was about a 40-minute discussion. Social impact finance came up, none of it. The interviewer nor Glenn talked about it, and it needs to be unpacked because Brazil is a center for cryptocurrency as well. My friend Raul from Silicon Icarus, he had a tweet today or yesterday about I think it's T2 or 2T, which is a Brazilian-based blockchain-based company, and that's going to be layered in with the smart contracts in the police state. So, you know, they would love for the kids, the youth in Brazil to sit in their, you know, maybe have a community center where they can do esports and power the metaverse and get the data impact markets for the social impact investors in Silicon Valley, where Jack Dorsey has a donor advised fund in the Silicon Valley Community Foundation, which is partnered with, you know, right there with Stanford. And they're the ones it's creating a market. They are market shaping, and it's not benevolent. It's absolutely not benevolent. So this is a much bigger conversation to be had. And Jason, I know I sent you a bunch of links. I don't know if you want to click through if any of them are particularly, but like, I do have some links to show what.
Yeah,
what
if you want to
there.
tell me what link you're interested in here, let me pull up my.
I don't know. Do you just want to pull up?
Oh, okay, sure. Hold on, and let me switch your view so you can actually see what the audience is seeing. Hold on one second. Video source. Okay, so now you should be able to see. Let me bring up your quality a little bit here.
That's fine. I mean, I kind of remember.
You know what it is. Okay, perfect.
So essentially, this is the Aspen Institute report. This was 2014, so it's mapping the sector. So these are investors that are eyeing up what their opportunities are going to be. And, you know, I don't need to go into it in deep detail, but if you go further down, I think there is a partnership, like Omidyar Network. If you scan to the slide of like who is involved in the program, Omidyar is, there you go. It's at the bottom line there. There's that on-off button again, right? ON, Omidyar Network. And at the time in 2014, Glenn Greenwald was still at The Intercept, and that was exclusively like funded by Pierre Omidyar. So to me, it seems like he has no excuse, even if maybe he didn't know it before, when someone starts to share this information and to press on this issue, that there should be some level of engagement. And I think what was so frustrating to me was that the interview that he did, the first half an hour or so, was all about censorship and gatekeeping and controlling the narrative, when Omidyar Network is a central player in setting up credentialed news and fake news and trusted sources in the media. And I know he's not there anymore, but to me it was very deceptive to have like essentially create your career in alignment with an individual who is doing the very same gatekeeping, and then saying that you would engage in good faith with people. And I agree, not all of the comments were appropriate, and some of them were off the mark, but mine weren't. Mine were actually very much on the mark, and he didn't reply before the interview to any of the links that I sent. And I did follow up after the interview and commented, and he had very, very snarky responses and said that no one was like entitled to sort of a personal response. It was just in the interview, which it was not. The interview covered none of this social impact finance in Brazil.
Okay, and then this Boa Vista
And
municipality.
so, yeah, so this is the pilot that was in Boa Vista. Again, not Rio de Janeiro. This is a rural area, but if they can set up these social impact pilots where they're coming into people's homes to track their parenting behavior with iPads and use that for social impact market, if they can do it in a small town, Boa Vista, they can do it in Rio as well. And I will say, if maybe we can include some of these links in the description afterwards if people want to poke around themselves. But it's very invasive. But what they need is they're going to need people on the blockchain with digital identities. And this was tied to low-income people on this Bolsa Familia program, which was a conditional cash transfer. And that conditional cash transfer, that's going to be programmable money on the blockchain in the future. And so this is all getting underway, and it's appropriate context. It was an appropriate ask for me to inquire as to his position and awareness of these programs in Brazil.
Okay, here's the next link.
Yeah.
Tech
So
Roundup,
again,
Brazil.
this is coming up like this month. So, what do they need to scale these programs? Well, they need everyone to have digital identity cards. And, it's hard to say. I know in the US, very likely the children's educational systems, these digital vouchers will be tied to digital identity. But, in the United States, what they call out of school time learning, which is the kind of learning that they would offer in these rec centers, both, athletic skills. Glenn Greenwald, he spoke very, he said multiple times that this was about them learning English. So again, I keep talking about this as a colonizing project, that the goal is to get these children ready to compete in the global economy, and to get them geared up for their educational opportunities that I in the US, the YMCA and the Boys and Girls Clubs are very central to both online blended learning and impact investing. And I know that the United Way is a key player here. The United Way is also involved in the impact space and opportunity youth in Brazil, but they need the digital identity. And there it is, like there's the proof that they're rolling out the government ID. Again, the conditional cash transfers. That's, if they can put you out of having an independent economic opportunities, and then tie you into, this is I think the World Bank. Jason, am I right? Is that a World Bank page?
Yes, it is.
The World Bank gets to govern whether or not you eat, right? And the World Bank and the investors get to determine if the way you parent your children it fits in with their model of, global digital citizenship and that sort of thing. So, the conditional cash transfer actually originated sort of out of pay for performance, pay for good behavior from Michael Bloomberg in New York. And then there was a program in Mexico called, I think, Oportunidades, and in Boa Vista. And then there's like 40 different countries that have these conditional cash transfers, but these will be melded with the digital ID.
And this is SoftBank.
Yeah. So I think, can you remind me does it say the name of the company? Is it T2 or 2T?
2TM.
This is the one that
2TM.
Okay, 2TM. So yeah, Raul Diego, he goes at Hijo del Cuervo on Twitter. Like, he tweeted this link yesterday. It's global, right? It's about cycling global capital. SoftBank is backing one of the largest innovation funds in AI and robotics and cryptocurrency. So the conditional cash transfers and the behavioral tokenized payments, the tokenization of everything, the capital is going to flow for where they see the good opportunities. Aspen Institute has marked out what the opportunities are. And then the cryptocurrency space, again, we need to understand that, money as we understand it, most people understand it, except for unless you're Jason and it's freedom tokens, is going to be changing, right? It's going to be changing. And the innovation elements are, SoftBank is based in Japan, although I think that this division role said that is actually the person is based out of Miami. So, again, nothing is isolated in this cloud-based world. Everything is interconnected and networked, everything. And it's all about circulating the investments, the global investments, and the concentrating the power.
Okay, this is a Verge, a Jack Dorsey article.
Yeah. So, this is the benefactor, the billionaire benefactor who's, going to fund the creation of this rec center. And then, there's a couple more in the pipeline. I don't know if he's funding those rec centers, but, he's also connected to the digital payment space that has now just pivoted to block for blockchain. And again, it's behavioral script coming. And, he has his donor advised fund in the Silicon Valley Community Foundation, which is actually a real sketchy sort of slush fund for a lot of crypto assets. And we need to understand that the smart contracts, the payment systems are going to be tied to the identity. So again, is this first project fully charitable, no strings attached? That's what they say. That's what they say. I have no reason to believe differently. But if we understand that the global north has a profound interest, the Silicon Valley, in the data analytics, and that's, again, ironically, like I'm on Twitter a lot, but Twitter is very much about mapping and the data analytics. This is about data. Jack Dorsey's out of school time learning for the youth of favelas in Rio de Janeiro is about market shaping for human capital finance. So this first project, which my understanding is it's like $250,000. Like, I mean, I can't even imagine what a tiny pittance that is to this guy. So, keep an eye out. He can afford to drop a lot more than that to set up to my way of thinking. Once you understand it's about data analytics tied to digital identity and behavioral compliance, it's a mining program. It is a human capital mining program, which is very much in alignment with resource extraction in Brazil. Like, we know the history of this. It's an extractive, colonizing, predatory system, and the mining system, which is what digital identity and conditional cash transfer and online digital learning and esports and metaverse gaming and coding and the stuff that, who knows? Like, I'm fully, willing to sit back and see what kind of rec center this ends up being. But if we're not actually talking about that these are problematic things on the horizon, what's to stop it from happening? And the inability and unwillingness of prominent individuals who should know better and who should be willing in good faith to engage in the conversations, the fact that they will not, says a lot to me.
I remember John Trudell said that, I wish I had the clip, but he's like, they're mining you. They're mining you. And this was back early 90s. Anyways, yeah, he was pretty prophetic. So the next one here is... He knew.
Yeah, so this is Stanford. And I remember, it's interesting. I got invited, it's weird, by into a... it was like a conference or something. I can't, Lapes. It was like the Latin American sort of like socialist educational group. And I thought it was like a big conference, but it turns out when I went, it was sponsored by Westchester University, and it was really just a couple dozen people from Philly, and then all these people from Silicon Valley, like the Bay Area educational institutions. And I was trying, me, like, I'm like, it's XAPI, it's about tracking data, it's about human capital finance. And they did not really, except for the person who had invited me, and I'm sure like this person got a talking to afterwards, like they did not want to engage. And, afterwards, this person actually had ties to Brazil. And so I found this Lehman Center at Stanford, and I'm like, wow, it's like education, entrepreneurship, and technology. Like, this is everything I was talking about. Like, this is something you guys need to pay attention to this. This is a problem. And, like nobody really wants to talk about that. But it's Silicon Valley has had its eye on Brazil's youth for quite some time. They up here, they're reimagining education. And I talked about that very clearly in this last segment about reimagining education for data-driven, badge-based, behaviorist learning. But it's not just here. They're interested in reinventing people all over the place. And again, if you target the favelas community, because it's, they're tight, packed. There's a lot of people in there. If you can figure out a way to get your infrastructure in to mine that, which rec centers could very well be, rec centers with QR codes and digital identity systems and badges, and getting that social emotional learning data and the teamwork data and the entrepreneurial spirit data into the system, like that's going to be very profitable for impact investors. So, I think it's really important to know not everyone would know about the Lehman Center in Stanford and Brazil.
Yeah.
But no comment from Glenn Greenwald on any of these things. I don't bring things up unless I actually know what I'm talking about. I have a lot of material. And in fact, Stanford, again, they were looking at youth. Greenwald, in that interview, he talked, I can't remember the funder, but that there was a young person who set up their own media outlet, like a youth voice media outlet. So I like the idea of youth voice for sure. But the youth, and that's the thing with the whole, like if you look back at the whole Greta movement, is that disconnecting youth from community and elders, the youth don't really have a lot of life experience, and they're not necessarily going to think that everybody's out to get them, right? Like they're not going to imagine that someone who's like setting them up with their own program it has a nefarious rationale behind it. But I can't remember in the interview, Glenn said they gave the kid $1 million or something. I mean, it's absurd. Not that the youth shouldn't have these opportunities, but even UNICEF has their own whole youth media outlets. And so it's about controlling the narrative and bringing the children up in a certain way of thinking so that they grow up in a certain box and they're not really empowered to think outside the box that they're given. They're given resources, but they're going to be conditional. Like that's the game here. And so, Stanford is involved in that. And I think if you click forward, there's one more.
I came up with a term, gratification.
Yeah.
No. Okay.
And all for the youth, like they should be empowered, but not by the impact investors. They should be empowered by their communities, and they should be like connected intergenerationally, because that is where the strength of community is in intergenerational learning, not separate, spinning youth out and then lifting them up and having them become fodder for these solutions journalism markets. Yeah, so this is the impact report specifically on the favelas of Rio de Janeiro, engaging, empowering, and enabling youth to lead. Again, Stanford, right? So, Greenwald is supposed to know about neoliberalism, right? And in fact, even in this interview, like he acknowledges, I mean, his frame is essentially the world is just really, really messed up. So it's only a place of privilege to say we shouldn't be taking money from neoliberal billionaires because we really have no other choice. And again, I think that maybe goes back to your, abolition framing, right? Like revolution or abolition is like, are we reaching this model, or do we have to have something completely different? And then if we're going with the tweaking model, which is the Greenwaldian, neoliberal tech billionaire funding your youth program, you're training the youth to essentially be dependent on the tech billionaires, which I guess, I give it to the interviewers, even though the interviewer, Andre, he didn't go into any of the impact space. He never responded to any of my questions about the impact, but he did push back on Greenwald about the neoliberalism and about like, once you go down this road, as I always say, pay for success finance, human capital finance is predicated on austerity and starving accountable, ostensibly elected officials from ever being responsible to do what they're supposed to do, which is to provide the services that people need. And that austerity is a precondition for the public-private partnership for the data surveillance of low-income people. So, clearly Stanford knows what's going on. And it is irresponsible and not fulfilling the fiduciary duty of these two individuals to ignore this. They can't ignore it. And I'm showing up to say, like, I told you. And everyone who is like some big fan of these people needs to pressure them, because how do we actually move forward if people don't understand the game that we're in? And it's a game. It's a terrible, brutal, ugly game. And it's been going on for a long time. It's been going on. So, they're trying to figure out a way of working out social impact bonds in Brazil. This is from 2016. They said they haven't quite figured. The first trial run didn't go so well, but they're going to need the digital ID and the conditional programmable money. That's about all I got on here. And Ready Nation, which I mentioned, Boa Vista, that had the home visit pilot. The mayor of Boa Vista, Brazil, went to the Ready Nation conference in 2018, and they rang the NASDAQ bell. And they said, like, great, we're investing in early childhood and workforce training for youth, which is what these centers will evolve into once you get them hooked in. And I suspect, you know, if it follows the model of the global north, is that you will get the youth in, and then you will get their families, and then we get that data, and then you will start putting the families on programs like health programs, wellness programs, financial management programs, food assistance programs, but all of it being conditional and tied into the impact markets. Ready Nation is actually, can we go back one second before on the Ready Nation? It's part of something, no, you were good, tied with something called Council for a Strong America. Council for a Strong America is a really creepy organization, and Ready Nation is one of 5 program areas that they have. The 5 areas are essentially, their goal is to train the youth, and this is global, to be in alignment, behaviorally conditioned, and accepting of the police, the military, the workforce, which is Ready Nation, chambers of commerce, and evangelical Christianity, specifically evangelical Christianity, and athleticism. And so once you know that, like, if the entry point is, you know, these rec centers, right, athletics that kids, you know, a lot of kids like, especially if they're trapped inside and they need to get out and exercise, but feeding into these other 5 areas, which are hugely problematic. And again, I think, like, from an identity point, like Glenn Greenwald was trying to make it about, you know, and some of the critiques, again, were inappropriate about him, you know, like homophobia. But Ready Nation is in Brazil, and they're connected with evangelical Christianity, which is highly problematic in that space. So, you know, we need to actually look at what's going on and not be so strident and attacking people who are raising serious issues, because this is a very serious issue. And I would really encourage people to look at Council for a Strong America, because in that space, Jim Heckman, who is the Heckman equation, is what's driving all of this, at least in early childhood. You know, someone brought up the military readiness of this was in the United States, but like, oh, well, maybe people would fund pre-K if they found out that people weren't passing the SVAB test, which is the Army, like, military vocational like training, like the standardized testing for the military. If they didn't know, if they were seeing that the youth of today were not equipped to drive the new tanks, then they might invest in pre-K so that they could do this. I'm sorry, did I freeze up?
No, you're good.
Can you still see?
I
Okay.
see you. Yep. I just switched
All right.
it
There's
to
a little picture on my computer froze up. So.
So this is Esports Revolution sweeping through Brazil's favelas. Gamers.
Yeah. Well.
Okay.
Yeah. And so I mean, part of what I talked about in this this last final episode, was about Epic Games and, you know, the Unreal Engine and coding video games, that this guy Megan wanted all of the youth to code his games, which the games are the virtual world. The games are the virtual world. And a lot of this is happening in esports. And, you know, so my question in these rec centers is, eventually, is the model going to actually have a robust in-person sporting program? Or due to, you know, pandemic surveillance requirements, are they going to encourage kids to, like, maybe, you know, hang out in different pods and play virtual soccer, you know, virtual football? You know, this soccer and esports, that's how you do it. You create a biosurveillance state and you say you can't bring people together, and then you get their health impact data and their biosensor data. So the esporting and the gaming in youth culture is already embedded in that space. And so if you start to essentially come in and say, well, we're here to train the youth, like, is that what the rec center is going to, like, maybe not this first one, maybe the first couple will actually have real soccer fields, and maybe the 10th one will, but will the 20th, if we know that the future is esports and gaming and keeping people locked up to be able to get their data captured, which is exactly what Silicon Valley wants, and to feed it all into the digital twinning. And again, I have lots of questions that are relevant and a relevant context to the conversation about rec centers and favelas, and how it fits into current youth culture. But none of those conversations can be had if people will not engage. So I'm trying to remember, this is a little blurry for me. Is smart cities, is that a smart cities? Yeah, just, and I think actually Raul at Silicon Icarus actually has a piece, I don't remember the title, but specifically on surveillance smart cities in Rio. So again, all of this, and I will say, I think I might have a closing slide, but it's symbolic. I feel like the rollout of these programs, some of it is the economics of where the good investment opportunities are in terms of profit, and so, but the other piece is the social control piece. And I've said, and from one of the first couple of interviews with you, the first couple episodes, I talked about Maroonage, like Maroon culture, the escaping enslavement in that tradition of creative removal from the system of slavery into swamps or remote areas where, enslaved African people were still able to practice their cultures and their own community. That Maroon model is very central in terms of thinking about how to address what's coming. And so, the Maroon culture was central in the Caribbean. It was in the U.S. and Florida and the Dismal Swamp in North Carolina, but it's very robust in Brazil as well. And so when you look to see what communities are being targeted for being blockchained and for being corralled into the metaverse, I think it is significant that Brazil, with such a rich history of Maroon culture, is a part of that and part of like this smart city surveillance web. And there you go. So we've got Omidyar. I think this is a few years ago, but they're working on, civic technology. And I think this speaks to, if you listen to the interview, the full interview section, and I have it linked in I uploaded a clip that was relevant to the rec center discourse, but the link to the full interview is in the description on my YouTube channel. And the full interview, the whole beginning was about censorship. But Omidyar Network has essentially has a whole program around journalism management, media management, and civic technology. And they want to say what good digital citizenship is. They want to prescribe what can be said, what quality journalism said. And I would say, even in that interview, Glenn Greenwald multiple times said, well, this person that I was arguing with, which wasn't me, it was someone who was like in the oil workers union, wasn't, I don't know, what is the blue tick on Twitter, like wasn't credentialed or wasn't registered. Like I didn't know who that person was that I was arguing with. And so the idea of like digital legitimization and was something that's sort of on his mind. He was definitely identifying, like if he couldn't identify for sure who this person was on the other end of the Twitter exchange, like he questioned the motives, like he couldn't engage in the conversation. So the idea of civic tech, e-government, data analytics government, the smart cities is central, and Omidyar Network is clearly, working in the Latin America space, of which, Brazil is a very large population. So is that it? Did I get everything?
Yeah, that's it. So here we are, we're back. And
sorry.
That's all right. No, that was great. That was, that we can make that clip.
I think it's just important. I'm gonna like put a post about it, but like, we have to understand when things are not said. There's a lot going on in the media that remains unsaid in the resistance to. The unsaid things, what is left unsaid is often tells you as much about what's going on as the things that are.
Okay, and I'm going to have to, because I was doing that, I'm way behind on the questions, but I don't even think we're going to get, I don't think we're going to get to even half the questions. There was a lot of stuff today. So I'm going to, we're getting a little late start on the questions, but that's great because we got lots of great content.
Thank you, people, for hanging with me. I hope you got something out of that. I just felt it was impromptu somewhat, but
yeah. Well, and I'm sure Glenn and is watching, and Jack Dorsey, and we're making progress here. Okay, so I'm going to start going through this. Maybe I'll do 2 at a time, where we can keep this, and then because I don't know, we can just try it that way.
Yeah.
Just so we can try to get through as many of these as we can. So, what will be done with the young that do not perform to standard, and the old ills to retrain? Let me read one more real quick, and then if you can remember it.
Okay.
I would appreciate if Alison would share my information regarding the role of Norway in this whole social impact future. Share
Okay.
any information. Sorry, I said that wrong.
Yeah. So I would say, as far as the youth and the elderly, it's about getting as much data as they want. So actually, they're developing whole social impact markets around elder care and social robotics, because they want that data as well. And so there's going to be elder care social impact markets, and that's going to be tied in with biosurveillance and the Grace, Hansen robotics, assisted nursing aids. I'm sure they're going to have a whole line of nursing home assists that get the data analytics for the impact markets. In terms of the people who will not measure up, that's going to be most people. But I think if you understand that the idea is to keep people acquiring new micro-credentials and jumping the hoops through behavioral compliance, emotional right-thinkingness, getting the data, that's what they want. They want everyone to keep going. They're I sort of talk about a future where, it's the billionaire class, and then sort of a veneer of data analysts and the managerial class and everyone else. So I don't think that there's going to be this wide gap of the caste system. I think there's going to be sort of a small chunk of maybe the top 3 to 5% of the population, and then slowly, and this may not happen immediately, but over the next 10 to 20 years, their goal would be that we slide into that we all become sort of redundant and just robot fodder, spiritual robot fodder. So you may be ranked, and I would say in the impact investing space, the thing that makes a difference is if they think your numbers, if you're going to get good motion on the numbers of the dashboard. So the most profitable people will be the people who are really broken, but can be made to look good on a dashboard with relatively limited investment. And so they'll be they want the sweet spot. The investors want the sweet spot of those people who can be pretty cheaply fixed, quote unquote, on the dashboards. There will be people who are so broken they're hard to fix, and then there will be people who are already working at a pretty good rate that won't have a lot of upside motion potential. But it's that sweet spot is in the middle. But I don't think that they're going to just necessarily try to off people. That's not where I'm coming from. There'll be just tranches of investment. It'll be tranches of investment, just like the mortgages, right? You'll be rated as far as your quality as an investment. And on the Norway, I think that the thing that's very central, and my friend, actually, if you know anyone in Norway, my friend Hege has done 2 translations of a couple of my pieces that she's Norwegian, trying to share out in the Norwegian community, because they're very firmly embedded in sort of smart sustainability. And that goes back to Harlem Brundtland. I wish I remembered. She was sort of Hege describes her as the Hillary Clinton of Norway, the semi-beloved, maybe not so much anymore, liberal progressivism. And she actually set up the Rio conference. So we're talking Rio, right? So that's a really important background too. So she set up the Rio summit that set up all of the impact markets 20 years ago. And so Norway is, all of really Scandinavia, is in the smart impact space. Norway also has a lot of work in the vaccine finance space, which we know that's what's going to be tied in with tracking everyone on the digital identity towards impact markets and post-humanism. And they also have a whole program around digital goods and things. So I think there's some connections through the UN to digital product spaces, which, as we know, the metaverse, the world under the guise of sustainability, is going to be made more and more virtual.
Okay. Let me bring this back up. So I'm still collecting questions, which I'm, if we stay till midnight, we'll get through these all we can.
Well, we could always do another one. We could save it and then go back.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I've got these in a notepad here. So if this isn't about genocide, but we are teaching the AI to how to think and feel like humans, isn't this about the end of humanity in the end? And I think you've talked about that this is, a war on natural life as we know it. But do you want to say something? Well, let me read one more real quick. Allison, do you have any new insights or general impressions from your reading Ilana Freeland's new book thus far? For me, it's the nuts and bolts of their IONBT rollout.
Yeah. Okay. Okay, so the first one was the genocide question. I mean, I think when I sort of intervene, I'm trying to address the sector of the resistance that's saying in the next 3 to 5 years, there's like cordwood stacked dead bodies in the streets. That's sort of my frame of reference. Now, I think there is a continuum that I've talked about a little bit, that there's like robots, and people, and they're working towards the continuum to make robots more like people and people more like robots, and that's through the nanotechnology. And it's very hard to say what the time horizon is on that. And, as things further progress, like whether or not we'll be fully conscious of all of it, like, I don't know. And I don't want to make dire predictions about the future. Like, I still don't think that they're going to be able to accomplish what they say they're going to be able to accomplish, but I don't dismiss it offhand, and I don't say that we shouldn't be taking it seriously. So that's sort of where I am again on the genocide question. And then, oh gosh, remind me the other one, Jason.
It was. I got to scroll back.
Oh,
up.
Alana's book.
Oh yeah. Thank you.
So I actually have to say, I need to make more progress on Alana's book. It's good. I mean, it's heavy stuff. I mean, I've been pretty immersed in the nanotechnology space. I have my friend Steffers that I like her work at A Peace of Mindful, like sends me regular updates about bioelectronics and things, much of which I can't actually open all of them, but multiple times a day. So like, I know that the nanotech space and the frequency space is really pivotal. This idea of synthetic biology and living material and engineered living systems to all of it. And I'm hearing about a lot of people getting Alana's book. So that makes me, I mean, she's, such a leader in this and has been at it so long, farther than I have. But I think that's why I took such offense at Eisenstein's sort of what I found to be a very misdirecting comment about the importance of nanotechnology in the conversation. So I don't have a specifically new thing that I've learned. I was, pretty in the space too, but I think it's very important to understand that at this point, like, it's not really about injections versus non-injections, because it's coming through the environment, and this stuff has been in the works, for decades and decades.
Okay. Next two questions. I don't trust crypto in general. This one we may not want to. We've addressed this quite a bit. This was asked. Was any?
I'm not
chance?
about blockchain.
Yeah.
I don't think there's good blockchain.
The answer of is there any good use of blockchain? The answer here is no on that one. And I actually am going to do more on that. Allison has made her position clear, but I'm working on stuff to actually engage that community a little bit more in depth. I'm in agreement with Allison, but I plan on putting out some stuff that actually goes into detail of why. The way I'm sure Allison has watched. Have you watched the movie Equals from 2015?
Actually,
it's about programming social distancing in our faces. Okay. Have you read the Wrinkle in Time? Well, yes, we talked about Wrinkle in Time.
I haven't read the whole series. I think I saw that. I read the. I mean, I may have when I was a little kid. I reread the second one though about the is it Charles Wallace, the younger brother, and his problem with the mitochondria and everything. So like, yeah, I think there's a lot, and it makes me sort of wonder, like, if it's predictive programming, are there people who actually have access to, like,
this person was just thanking. Oh, I'm sorry. I thought you were done.
No, I need to focus better on my reading. There's so much reading I want to do.
This person would just want to thank you for the heads up regarding JFK Jr. and the venture capital he's with, investing on impact finance. And I thought I would just bring that up because it is, again, this is someone a lot of people look up to. And so what's his connection to impact finance?
Robert F. Kennedy Jr. is a managing partner for Vantage Point Capital Partners, which is one of the largest, well, at least maybe 10 years ago. I'm not sure exactly where its standing is at this point, but it was an early and large significant venture capital fund in sort of green sustainability. But they're working on health tech, clean tech, batteries, a lot of things, which when I first started out and not understanding the full scope of the nanotech early on, I was just looking at the health investments that they had made, their portfolio. You can look them up on Crunchbase and it comes up. But that's why it's this whole package. There's actually, I brought it up a year ago that there was a slide share from Children's Health Defense that had a whole slide, like a slide that was specifically talking about vaccinomics and personalized vaccines, which was very problematic, that why that would be in their slide deck. And so I think within the space of people who are advancing the safe vaccine option, that we have to understand it within the venture capital space. And then really once you start to look at the energetics of bio-nanotechnology and piezoelectric human energy harvest and literally like a parasitization of our own internal organs into energetic systems and batteries. Right now they frame it as just, well, we're going to power our wearables with our piezoelectric. But I would say that the investment they've made in alternative energy and batteries are highly problematic to me. So again, like the door is still open. I would say, he or any of the people he's affiliated with could certainly start talking about this stuff, but I haven't really seen it yet.
Right. And I do want to read his book on Fauci, and I can appreciate certain aspects of things that someone does and also be critical of them in other areas. It doesn't have to be an all or nothing thing, but there are clearly problems. And also that approach too, it's like, it's basically siding with the virology, germ theory, and there are other theories out there that, and it kind of, it still like does kind of a workaround of like, oh, well, no, we just want better we want better studies and we want better, better vaccines or whatever, as opposed to
more data.
Yeah. There's other approaches. Yeah.
We could just get everybody on blockchain electronic health record, and then we could get really good granular VAERS data.
Right.
That's a Trojan horse.
No,
Sorry.
it's fine. So how do you go about conducting your research and mapping out the trajectories of these different organizations? What are some of the tool sites, rubrics that can be used to systematically map these out? You'd mentioned we have a whole bunch of, in fact, I have a video where she got kicked off of Little Sis, but you mentioned Little Sis. So if you go back to some of the old stuff, there's a lot on the mapping thing, even just the last Q&A.
Yeah, I mean, I would say what I'm realizing, and I think we talked about this a little bit last time, is that the cloud-based, the subscription model or the freemium model or these sorts of things, is that especially the open source stuff, like the admins can look from back behind. And so essentially, if you were going to engineer like an open source, was it Burrell calls it OSINT or whatever, like open source intelligence, that would be a great way, because then essentially what you do is you set up the opposition, the people you want to keep an eye on, and you say, here's this great free software to map all the stuff, and then you can keep an eye on what they're paying attention to, which is what I fell into. And what I say, like, we're all on a learning journey. Like, everybody's got, like, nobody's hopeless, nobody's stagnant or stuck. Everybody has the possibility to like turn the corner and learn stuff and get more coherent. And that was part of my learning journey, was the mapping. But for me right now, I have another one. I'm not going to say it because I have a feeling I'm going to get kicked off at some point. But like, I'll take a topic, and then, it's just like pulling a thread. Like over the last couple of weeks, I worked on Department of Energy installations because I saw that they were involved in the Moonshot project in Japan, the cyborg avatar capitalism. And then it evolved into looking at the Rockefellers in Japan. And then it evolved into the post-war Japanese tech companies and their connections, the Sonys and Japan Science and Technology Agency, which then went into humanoid robots. And so it just, the next thing leads to the next, to the next. And as you look at people's bios, for me, oftentimes just being very looking in a very systematic way at LinkedIn's or biographies of people operating in certain spaces, it tells you a lot about that community. Like sitting down and really looking at all the biographies of the people who were on the committee of the Humanoids 2000 tells you how the structure was set up. And for me, that's the stuff I feel like they're not interested in the average person knowing about, because it's not these high profile, larger than life characters like Klaus Schwab. It's the academics who are in, our institutions of higher learning, who are often being funded by corporations and defense interests to build this stuff, right? And that's where we should be questioning those people. And some, oftentimes they're your neighbors.
Right. So FedEx is partnered with the crypto XYO as well as Microsoft, which is heavy on tracking things, and is laying the groundwork for tracking people on the blockchain. So someone was just saying that FedEx is involved with this. So I don't know if you've come across anything that FedEx is doing.
I mean, I think I keep mentioning, and in this last video, that supply chain tracking, right? It's process, it's systems engineering tracking. So I didn't know about that, but I'm not surprised. I think DHS, which is the German transit company, Deutsche something, like maybe out of the post office, even the German post office, like they're tied in with blockchain tracking as well. So like once you understand that we're part of the supply chain, what I mentioned about UPS and social impact finance starts to make more sense. They want to know where you are, and they want to know what you're doing, and they want to know if it's in alignment with what they've told you that you should be doing.
Okay.
In space.
Right. Knowing the elites' double meaning in their speech, what does the Great Reset mean for them? What do they have to lose? How may they be resetted? Are there consequences of their plan failing, I guess, for them? And then another thing is, how does Alison retain all this information, organize it, and then articulate as well as she does her mind? Okay, that was just a compliment. I have no idea how you do it, Alison. I forgot I just forgot what I was thinking 2 seconds ago.
So in terms of what happens if their reset fails, I mean, I don't think that they're going to accomplish it all. But I don't know. Like, I don't really spend a lot of time thinking about, I mean, I do, like, I map them, but in terms of them, like, personally, I don't spend a lot of time mulling over all the individuals as people. More, it's like mappable items. I don't know, maybe that's dehumanizing. To me, it's this moment of reckoning. It's this moment of reckoning, and we're all on these journeys trying to figure out, like, and be cognizant of the history and the trajectory. Yeah, I mean, I think ultimately they needed to make this transition because I mentioned, at least from the political economy standpoint, they have all of this concentrated wealth, and they need it to go somewhere, and they need to create the new debt products, and the new debt products require the data surveillance, or the game that they've set up requires the data surveillance systems and the digital identity systems. So if they didn't actually do the Great Reset in this way, and the one way to get everybody on digital identity systems, biometrics, is to create a global biosurveillance permanent pandemic scenario, then all of their money infrastructure would fall apart. And I think with that, the global supply chains and the military stuff would start to fall apart. It would all fall apart. And, I don't know how we have a soft landing out of this. It's hard to imagine how the soft landing would happen. But I'm not somebody, I had, someone who is a friend and a teacher to me, whose perspective was sort of burn it all down. And as a mom, like, I can't come to it from that space of burn it all down, like, and pick out something out of the wreckage. Like, I want to hope that there's some way of doing it that is respective of life. But I don't know exactly how we do it.
There are over 46,000 people subscribed to Allison's channel on Telegram. I see there are only 34 people watching. Where is everybody? I wanted to mention that because that is
Not
something.
1,000, 4,600.
Oh, yeah, I said that wrong. I said that, no. It's wishful thinking, I was like, 46, there's a million people. But, I've been watching
Maybe he's spying on me.
Uh,
Maybe all the people on Telegram are just spying to see what I'm up to.
Yeah. Well, I've been watching the progression of the social media, and it seems like they're getting really, really good at controlling narratives. And I believe that people, if at this point, if someone actually goes viral, it's because they let you go viral. I don't think I don't think anything goes viral naturally anymore. At least in these spaces, because I know that I got a lot more viewers when I had less subscribers. And there's a lot of little hints, but it's hard to prove. It would be great if we had like a university, like that's going to happen. But you could actually do a study and find out, like, even on Facebook, okay, who's seeing what, and actually do a detailed study on how, what information is getting more reach versus what's not getting reach based on the political nature of it. But it would in order to prove this, it would require a little bit of effort. And so, but most of us that are in this space who are actually challenging official narratives, it's pretty obvious to us that our voices are being suppressed, even beyond just the overt censorship where they're like, oh, we took down your video, but there's a lot of behind the scenes shenanigans going on. And so that's why we don't have many viewers, but that's why we all need to be more proactive in getting this out there. Like, download the video yourself, upload it to your channel, make a VHS copy of it. I was joking. We need to bring back VHS tapes. No, I used to.
I would say too, like, the most powerful thing is if people can start to internalize this stuff and just tell it the way you would tell it.
Right.
It's frustrating. Like, I had a comment again, like on the one we just posted, that was sort of like, Allison, you're just getting so much play, but I don't understand anything. You need someone to do this or that, the other. I'm like, no, I don't actually. I'm me. I'm here doing the thing I do. And either if it resonates or it doesn't, but like, I'm not here saying I'm above you. I'm saying, like, I'm here to share the way I share. And then people need to take responsibility then for figuring out how it makes sense to them. And then to spread the word. Like, that's how it actually grows. And I'm getting like, okay, I'm just going to say, so there's this, like, someone shared with, like, this event 2021 or whatever. And, it's literally like 40 something of the who's who of all of these people in the resistance. And just, like, I think I tweeted, I'm like, it's this, like, feels like, I'm just going to go there, like, holistic, prosperity gospel, crypto, ascension or something. Like, it's like a product. It's like an industry. It's like the resistance industry. I'm not the resistance industry. Like, that's not what I'm here for. And I'm not, like, trying to critique, but like, you kind of have to figure out what your path is. Like, are you going to be like a consumer in the resistance industry? Or are you going to do something else? Like, and the thing that I'm trying to do is, like, I'm prickly. I'm not easy. I'm not here to be popular, but I'm here to, like, I think I said it in Telegram today, like, get people a kick in the butt when they need a kick in the butt. Like, and I'm not doing it just to be inflammatory. I'm just like, this is what we need to do. Own your stuff. Don't pop on my videos and say, I'm doing it wrong for you. Like, you figure it out. Like, if you have a legitimate clarity question, like that we've gotten these questions, that's good. And I'm happy to talk about that. But just, like, the cop out of, like, I don't want to, like, you don't speak to me as if I should change. Like, no, I'm not changing. I'm doing my own thing. And then if it resonates, it resonates. If it doesn't, then move on. But we all have to take responsibility for the message. So it shouldn't really count on, like, who's listening to me. I never wanted to be the person anybody listened to. Like, really, I got into this because they closed 23 of our schools. I'm just a mom. Like, literally, I had someone ask me today to be part of a project with, like, many illustrious, like, labor leaders and academics. And I'm looking at them going, none of these people are talking about the thing I want to talk about. And I don't actually want to be in that group, because then it, like, why is it me as a mom in Philadelphia? Like, we all need to do this. Like, we actually need to just take down the credentialed class and the hero class and the celebrity media class. We need to just not do that and all own the stuff. Like, anyway, sorry for my platform, but, like, that's the way I feel. I don't,
Yeah. Well, and
I
for
would
me,
be the person.
it's kind of funny because I'm trying to promote your work, and then Allison is like the anti-marketer, like everything that you're not supposed to do to get your stuff out there. She's like blocking everybody on Facebook, and then she got invited a couple years ago to James Corbett's show. She's like, no, and you're not
No, I
interested.
didn't.
Was
I
it?
didn't get that
Oh,
one.
okay. Well, I know you've been invited to certain things, the Greater Reset, and you're like, no, I'm not comfortable
was
with
that
like the
one.
message that you need. And then, but you've been invited to other things like different rallies, like that were like
Well,
kind of
I
freedom
mean,
rallies.
it has
But
to
but
make
you're
sense.
trying to maintain, a focus. And you're doing your thing, and it's like, even me, it's like, oh, I if I were you, I would do that, but it's not my decision to make, it's yours, and I respect that. But it's just funny because you're clearly, some of the accusations against you were like, oh, she's just trying to get a cult. I'm like, she's actually doing everything she can. She's actually hurting her audience growing. But I had this problem with my, I ran this film festival, Argus Fest, many years ago, and it was a challenge because I knew, like, initially when I built it, I was kind of like the darling of the Democrats and nonprofits and everything. But then I'm like, oh, you know what? Like, yeah, there is problems with the 9/11 narrative. So I'd show films about that. Oh, there is problem with the HIV narrative. So I'd show films about that. So I knew that that was going to split my audience off. But I'm like, I'm going to pursue the truth wherever it leads me, and not really worry about trying to build large numbers of people, because those things actually end up competing with one another. If you're more focused on building a large audience, I think your message is going to start getting watered down, and you're going to start making it safe for everyone, and the truth is not safe. So
No,
um
it's not.
okay. This is a question for Allison. Jason, what's your assessment of the Real Anthony Fauci book, which I haven't read it, so I can't really speak to that. So I don't. Have you read it?
I would just say it's about like impact investing. As much as we like focus on these larger than life figures and make this about a health event, it's not a health event. It's a finance event. It's a metaverse event. I mean, the biosurveillance is enabling the metaverse, but it's a metaverse event that's tied to data surveillance and impact investing. And as long as we get everyone thinking it's about Fauci, like, all you need to know is like the system is corrupt. The goal is to get you on blockchain and then to track you and ultimately to move from wearables to biosensors. Once you know that, that's enough. Like, I don't need every single little bit of tiny data to tell me about ins and outs of all these things. Like,
and I'm not opposed to someone exposing Fauci. He is corrupt, but it's like, I got into a little bit of a debate with someone on Facebook the other day about this, because they were wrong in Fauci, and I'm like, you realize that Fauci's just a servant. He's not actually in charge. Yes, he's horrible, but he's replaceable, and I think that's really the key. There's a system in place that he serves, and he serves very well. But yeah, I think that to spend too much energy on that and not on the larger thing that they're representing and they're serving, you do that to your detriment.
yeah.
What are your thoughts on engaging
Does it
youth?
talk about the HIV stuff too? Like, I don't know.
I
if
haven't
that's
read
in
it.
the
I
book.
actually plan on getting it and reading it, and I kind of doubt he goes into that, which is unfortunate, because they're totally the HIV narrative and this narrative are like, they overlay. It's really incredible.
I mean, I would say, just from my point of view, if you're reading it, and I haven't read it, so I don't know if that's in there, but like, I've connected, and this was something that was not on my radar at all. Like, it's not until occasion comes for you to learn these things, because it's not like you're going to learn them from the mainstream media or in your school classes or any of this. But I connected with several, very solid researchers who had long histories in the AIDS dissident community. I didn't even know that there was such a thing, like, until you do, and then you find out. And then once again, Jason, you look at the histories, that where we're at now came from a very specific long history, and the HIV setup and the policy programs around that were a direct tie-in with where we are now, and similar players, similar approaches, similar considerations around, terrain and, big pharma and everything else. So yeah, that's a really big piece. I lost you.
I had coughed, so I had muted myself. And if you want to learn more about that, there's a really great film called The House of Numbers. And I had actually brought the filmmaker out to Denver, and I rented a big theater and had a big deal about it, and lost a lot of. I've had a lot of people very angry at me. But it's called House of Numbers. You can actually still find it on YouTube in certain places. Or you can also order the DVD. I actually recommend ordering the DVD because it's got a lot of extra really great interviews, including Carrie Mullis, who created the PCR test. And then there's also a book by Peter Duisberg called Inventing the AIDS Virus that I highly recommend. And he kind of challenges how, like a lot of the virology, the overt focus on virology at the expense of looking at other things. And then he talks about AIDS and HIV. Okay, so what are your thoughts on engaging youth that are entering technology fields from low-income communities, confronting these ideas in academia? And I'll read one more. How can you have a united front with people who are not on the same page or using a line of thinking which you disagree? Disagreements are not inherently bad. This is a comment. They should be addressed always. So those were the two.
Yeah. Well, I would say in terms of youth, I mean, they're, I keep saying, I think they want Black and brown kids to code the metaverse. I think it's being sold as STEM education is being sold as sort of your ticket out, your ticket to like a good, stable life. And they're not really addressing that a lot of the work that's going to be coming is going to be grueling. It's going to be the new factory work. It's going to be the new piecework. Already, there are many people who are displaced in India doing coding jobs, and eventually AI is going to be doing that coding. So it's not the route out, but they target low-income communities because that's going to be the social impact market tied again to United Nations Sustainable Development Goal 4, which is all about educational technology. So, I mean, the question is like, how do you talk? And I don't know, like, I realize that we're all in the machine. So I'm not trying to like presume you can't contribute to the movement if you're part of that space. One of the early, I went to Tulsa, Oklahoma in January of 2020 to talk about impact investing because Tulsa is a center of that with the Kaiser Foundation and the Schusterman Foundation. And, I gave a couple talks, and the first night the talk was being filmed or live streamed by someone from the DSA. And at the end, like they were talking about, essentially, I was talking about, I can't remember the name of the app, but it was an app essentially providing like support to get people to court. Uptrust, I think that was the app. It was this Uptrust app, and it was out of Northampton, Massachusetts, and they were going to have this app to give people sort of wraparound supports to make sure they didn't miss their court date, and which is like peak neoliberalism, right? And that's going to be this impact market. And the people who were filming me from DSA said, we're so angry about that because we actually did all of that coding work. That was our project, and then they stole it and made a company out of it. And I'm looking at like the social progressives going, you made the court appearance app? What were you thinking, right? And so it's hard because if you think about making this transition, there's a huge amount of our community that's their gift. When I say like know your gifts and how to give them, there's a huge number of people whose gifts, such as they are around coding and computing and engineering. And like and those in my mind, I mean, based on the history, at least of the cloud computing, it's military technology. So how do we know, like, if your gifts are embedded in military tools, like how do you find a way to use them in a way that supports life? And I don't know, but I think if we start talking about it, maybe we can figure it out. So I would just say, like, selling kids on STEM education in low income communities, that it's your way out is doing a disservice to those kids, because that's not the plan. The plan is to flood the market with low cost labor, especially girls in STEM, girls coding. They're going to use that to suppress all the wages and to feminize AI. Actually, that's another piece of it. So that was that piece. And I'm sorry, Jason,
You know what? I deleted it. I'm trying to clear this up.
Oh, darn
Sure.
it, I'm sorry.
No, it's okay.
Uh,
Oh wait, I can undo. Hold on. Well, I undo. I think I can pull it back up. Edit. Nope, I can't.
oh, it was about unified front, right? Wasn't it something about like how do you have a unified front with people you disagree with?
Yes, that was
Was it
it.
that
Thank
comment?
you. Yep.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I mean, my position is like I'm not necessarily. I don't think it's a numbers game. I think it's a clarity game. I think it's not a game. I think it's a spiritual engagement around having coherent thinking, and it's not about numbers. And it's never been for me. Anybody who follows me knows that's not really how I roll. So I know that's not how everybody thinks, but I think it's about looking at things with as much truth as you can muster, refining your assessment of the situation as things move along and you get new information, and trying to be, consistent, good, clear thinking, and to assert your position. And I can say you can have differences of opinion, for sure. And then I would say having a difference of opinion is fine. Then people just need to find their positionality in that space. But as I mentioned with the Glenn Greenwald thing, is if you obscure your position or you play both sides or you try to mix and match and confuse things, that's not doing anybody any service. So if there's one thing about me, it's like I'm pretty consistent. That's what I try to be, I'm not going to like change my point of view just to fit in with what other, like a bigger group is thinking. Can you still see me? I know it's getting dark. Do you need me to turn on the light?
No, you look fine. It looks fine still.
Okay.
I'll let you know though, but it still looks okay. From an education standpoint, these terms are brand new to some. Is there a way to build a framework where local groups can study these and start divvying the work? And then I'll read one more. Would you recommend bringing students into the fold to debate these concepts that they may not have considered before, or considered because they may be experts in their field but haven't made the connections in between them?
Yeah. Well, I think it would be great. I don't know. I have good intentions on the glossary and like setting up some sort of like introductory coursework on my blog, and I haven't done it yet. And I kind of have this big winter project I imagine about dealing with this Texas map and mythology. So it may be a spring project to index the material I have and make it more accessible. But everything I have is just for the collective. Anybody's willing to sort of pick it up and use it. Just don't hurt people with it. So, feel free to rework, remake. I wish I could promise that I would have something more accessible immediately. Maybe what we can do is to come up with at least a short starter intro points. And I know Jason's been doing a really nice job about pulling some clips from some of my longer talks that are like nice starting points. So, that may be something that we could do, is like have a page of like pointers or, provocative things to think about, points to think about. And I'm good with the debate. Like I'm fine debating these things. Like I think, I'm not interested in debating blockchain with people, because I think for the most part, like I have a pretty firm position on that. Like I don't want to debate people on blockchain. Other people can. Jason, you can debate people on blockchain. I think that'd be fine. Like I'm not speaking for other people. I think like robust conversations about it are useful. And I do agree that most people are not thinking in a synthetic way. That when we talked about that the last conversation, that people are credentialed to specialize and to be like have expertise in narrow areas. And so people aren't used to knitting together the pieces of the machine. And also, I mean, I say there's not an economic or a social incentive to knit together the pieces of the machine, because like once you do, as people say, like Allison, like people can only listen to you for 5 minutes because it's too overwhelming and scary. Like, I'm sorry. like, like this is my job. Then you can turn it off after, 15 minutes if you need to. But like my job is the knitting together. That's what I feel like my job is, that knitting together. So if we can teach more people to knit things together in a way that is like not necessarily like aggressive, like this is right, this is wrong, but like let's explore how this machine works. Because I think if we can get out of the identity politics side of things and we can sort of put it out and say, let's think, how does this machine work? What does it mean to create global markets in poverty management? Where does that go? Those conversations are great. And I think young people need that, but they need some historic context because they need to understand that the internet is a military project. If they don't have that understanding that the internet is a military project, they're not going to end up in the, like, have the right framework. If they don't understand what human capital finance is, they're not going to get to the right place. So I think that there's some key pieces of information people need to make an informed assessment, because outside of having that information, you're just going to be lost.
And I want to nip something in the bud here real quick. There was a comment on the thread about slandering Robert F. Kennedy when he's doing such immensely important work. And I want to just, because this has come up in the past. Alison doesn't slander people. She makes legitimate criticisms based on the content of their work, or if they're not addressing something, or if they have associations that are concerning. It's important that we have the ability to bring that out and say, hey, address this. This is something of concern to me. It's not a personal attack. I mean, she doesn't know I don't know Robert F. Kennedy Jr. That's not what this is about. But also within the space, I think that there are efforts in order to divide. It's the divide and conquer, and they want to have these personality conflicts. And they've done a pretty good job of getting people riled up of like, oh, she's attacking this person. But if you actually go back and listen, and I'm not just defending Alison, I'm defending a principle here, which is if you go back, because I've followed this all along in all of these different conflicts, every single time Alison has a very specific and substantive based criticism of the work that that people are doing, or what they're leaving out, or different associations that they have that are like maybe connected to some of these things that are going on that we're concerned about or that we're opposed to. So I just want to just clarify that.
I can't believe somebody said I slandered. Like, doesn't that mean you lied about somebody? There's nothing that I said is.
Yeah, no, it's clear. It's not slander, and I just wanted to point that out, and I'll give the person the benefit of the doubt.
He's the managing partner for Vantage Point Capital. Like, that is a very specific place in the machine that is situated not just in any venture capital firm, but one that is specifically around sustainability and green finance and alternative energy. So anyone who needs to actually zoom out and understand the conversation around nanotechnology and alternative energy and biological computation, there's a very specific reason they would like to keep that conversation focused on vaccines. There's a whole heck of a lot of synthetic biology engineering that's going on that is being invested in. Look at the portfolio, people. Look at it and decide for yourself. That's what I'm telling you.
I just came up with a phrase. It's really new. It's follow the money. It's kind of. I think this idea is going to catch on. Well, and I get it though, because you are like, I appreciate some of the voice that on certain issues that RFK and others have brought, but that doesn't mean they're free from criticism. If in certain areas. So, yeah. So I just wanted to address that. Let's see here. Okay. I don't know if she is on the up and up. Oh, this is a conversation. Okay. I'm going to skip that. I think that was relating to some other conversation that was happening. And I think that was something else. Hold on. There's a lot. I'm trying to manage these things.
That's okay. Thank you, Jason. We appreciate you.
Are many people in... Here's a question. Are many people and kids in Rio who live in devastating conditions? I can see how they can be conned into working for these impact projects if they don't understand the larger scope. So this was just a comment about they can understand how someone's poor or whatever can be pulled into
well, I would say
offer you a job.
Members, yeah, I mean, I'm in Philly, right? I mean, and you know the landscape here. I mean, there is a class of people who are hired to run these programs, right? And no one goes into this work, to think that they're going into it to be part of a predatory system. That's not what motivates most average people, but they get hooked into the system. And what I mentioned earlier is that actually often what's going to happen, because this is a 2-generation project, the Kesey Foundation that I mentioned in the discussion, is that they're going after the children and the parents, and especially for like reskilling. And so what they'll do is they'll have the parents of the kids in the rec centers run the programs, and then the training and the reskilling of the adults also become an impact market. And then their fulfillment of the impact program becomes an impact metric. And so everybody's a vertical in the machine. Everybody's a cog in this machine of global betting, including the adults. And so there are very few people who have the headspace to understand how the machine operates, but Glenn Greenwald is one of them. Glenn Greenwald is someone who, based on his direct background and experience and life experience, knows very well, if provided specific links, how this machine would work. He has the mindset to understand it. And the fact that to refuse to engage in genuine critique and concern for these communities is a concern. So my worry is about the community leaders who would be pulled into these programs, not knowing that maybe down the line, they're going to come with your kid coming home with a laminated QR code, to access their community center. That's the thing that worries me, and that's the thing that if you're actually in this space because you care about these families and resolving the problems, you're going to want to hear what I have to say.
Okay. Are you aware of anyone with a large public following that's actually open to your research? It seems like that's been the constant challenge we've had. Everyone that has a big following is not interested in covering this. You'd have to ask them. Allison, you want to say something about that? No?
Well, I would say the person who had like a larger, like was part of a national journal media platform, which was Raul, was the first person to actually pick up impact investing. And he had this amazing piece, I guess maybe it came out in March, Bits and Bytes of Data Capitalism. And it was originally for Mint Press. And then eventually they parted ways, and now he has his own platform, which is Silicon Icarus. But like at that point, like Raul was the only person who actually had the wherewithal to call out social impact investing. And then later Ronald Cohen, who is really one of the main, like, I don't really give a darn about Fauci at this point. Everybody knows whatever they need to know about Fauci. I want someone to write the book on Ronald Cohen. Right. And so, but again, once you tread into that space, you become anathema. And, yeah, it's because that we're telling the things that they would rather kept behind the curtain. So I ask people, like, why don't you, like your favorite content creator, ask them, it doesn't have to be me, just ask them about social impact investing, ask them about that digital identity and blockchain smart contracts and conditional payments. Like, ask them to do that work. Like, eventually, if enough people provide that pressure, maybe they will be forced to acknowledge it. Because it's not about me, guys. It's not like, really, I am not here to be the Allison show. I am here to get the information out, and we all have that responsibility.
Yeah. I live near you in Lancaster, Pennsylvania, Allison, and we have only one venue that has implemented Vax Passes so far. How wide are Vax Passes in Philly? Are there Vax Passes in the ghetto? Anyway, someone was asking if that's, no, the interest here is really interested in how that connects to, I think our focus is how it connects to the impact.
I mean, I think it's intermittent. Like, I mean, at this point, like, I can't go to any live theater. Like, I mean, I used to really love Philadelphia's theater scene. Like, you have to have proof of vaccination to go to any live theater performance. These little ones. A lot of the museums have them. Hit or miss on the restaurants. But literally it's coming. I mean, if we look at what's happening in Italy, now their Green Pass extends to public transportation. And so it's trying to figure out like how much people are going to go with. I would say Lancaster, and I'm trying to remember his name and I forgot, but like our former school superintendent came out of Lancaster, or the state superintendent came out of Lancaster. And like the Lancaster area actually, I think, has some early nanotechnology. There's a report that I found a number of years ago that like was surprisingly about like early 1990s, maybe nanotechnology research, and it was in Lancaster, and I was surprised. But Lancaster has been a hotbed for EdTech, actually, a lot of EdTech, and because of the immigrant communities in the city of Lancaster, I think that they're sort of being targeted for impact. So, yeah, I mean, I think that the overall proof of vaccination is not so much here in the city. People are still generally masked, but I feel like it's only a matter of time. So we have to grapple with it.
So this question was, have you familiar with John Perkins' Pachamama Alliance? Now, I'm familiar with the Pachamama Alliance. I didn't realize John Perkins had anything to do with that. But it's once an economic hitman, always an economic hitman. I actually I filmed an event with John Perkins years ago, and afterwards, I can't remember what his answer. I should find the video for it. But like, it was kind of one of the things that bugged me about his presentation is at the end, he was like, he talks. If you don't familiar with John Perkins, he claims to have been like working for the CIA, and he would try to go into countries and get them to agree to the terms, and if they didn't agree, then they would send in an actual hitman. So he was like the step before, he would bribe them and try to get them to play ball, and then if they didn't play ball, they would go in and assassinate the leader, and I can't remember the leader, and I can't remember, but anyway, but he gives this talk about the CIA and how they're assassinating people and the corporations and everything, and then he's like, oh, we just need to we need to just work with the corporations to come up with better policies and plans, and I'm just like, wait, what? It was like a total disconnect from this guy's lecture. So it was, and he's someone that like a lot of people lifted up. I'm like, oh, he's a whistleblower. And I'm like, this, I'm kind of like once CIA, always CIA. Like he says, once a hitman, always a hitman. But I don't know if you have thoughts on Pachamama Alliance or John Perkins.
No, but I was thinking, one of the things that I touched on earlier, and I forgot the name of the group, but like, again, you sort of feel left down. Like, I don't know, people are like, oh, the purity test is a terrible thing, but I'm like, I don't know, there's some core values. So early on, there was this group that was under the guidance of Joel Covell and eco-socialism that was working in Venezuela with indigenous groups on sort of a reciprocal economy and locally based economies, which was like it sounded really good. But then eventually, even in that space, I had to walk away from these people because they wouldn't they were, into blockchain and other things like that. So, I think with the Pachamama, like my concern with some of the rates of nature and indigeneity is that, like, I think that's from a spiritual standpoint, like that's the core, is people's connection to land and systems, wherever you are in the world, and that historic connection. But because of the amount of trauma that has been carried out through colonization over years, is that those communities, have dysfunction. I mean, all communities have dysfunction, but the trauma that's embedded in them, like has caused lots of fractures. And many indigenous groups then look to the UN to get acknowledgement of the problems in their countries when the problems can't be resolved internally, especially like in North America. So of course the UN is a problematic entity in and of itself. And so my concern is like, within the sustainability and environmental and indigenous sovereignty movements where they overlap in a very authentic cultural practice, that has the potential of being co-opted and pulled out of alignment and being melded into this like social impact environmental movement. Like we talked about like tokenizing natural assets and actually creating the rights of nature on things like blockchain, that would essentially give rights to non-human aspects of the environment, and then blockchain it in ways that would actually cause further harm to indigenous peoples whose lands those are, whose cultural connections those are. So it's always like threading the needle, right? Like to both acknowledge that importance and then to realize that, you know, these powers have so much money to hire all the anthropologists and the policymakers that they're always weaponizing everything that is authentic and good. So, but in this moment, I will just give a shout out again to you know, our wonderful friend Deepti in India, and they're, you know, celebrating the rollback of the farm bills and the farmers' protests, because to me that is the most currently the authentic action of people coming from a position of collective faith-based stance for peace and connection to land and food systems, and you know, connection to their cultural faith practice that you know, essentially, you know, stood up to Modi and the global food system predation. Now, that doesn't mean that the battle's over. You know, it's going to be popping up somewhere else next. But to me, that is sort of an example of a movement that I think is really important to look to at the moment.
Yeah, and somebody said that if you've ever seen the movie, have you seen the movie They Live? It's a sci-fi movie. You got to see it. It's a really great movie. It's kind of like a sci-fi horror, but he puts these glasses on and you can see, of course, the people, they're aliens that are, you know, the elite or whatever. But he sees all the billboards that say obey and consume and all this other stuff. But you only see it with these glasses on. And so somebody mentioned that you're like the character from They Live.
Not
okay.
the aliens.
Not the alien. No, not the alien. Why do they use hexagons in most, if not all, their stuff? Does Alice know of the esoteric significance of this symbol? I like hexagons as this, you know, the shape of them is kind of cool, but like, I guess there's concerns about the. I don't know.
Well, I mean, I think the hexagon in nature is like this most efficient use of space, you know, which is the you know, why honeycombs are that shaped and everything, and you know, graphene is also the hexagonal shape. I'm not as strong in all of this symbology as other people, but clearly it's a metaphor. I mean, there's this discussions of also the hexagon, when you see it, like the blocks, the cubes can be contained within the hexagon, like the outline of a cube shape, which is the blockchain. And so I think a lot of people have talked about like the cult of Saturn and things. That's not my specialty, but like the idea of the cube or the black cube, you know, black rock, and this cult of Saturn and that sort of thing. So it is interesting that within the nanotechnology space, when we went to Rice University, there was a plaque for, I think it's Richard Smalley. I can't remember his first name. Last name's definitely Smalley. And he discovered the carbon fullerenes, this Buckminster fullerene structure of carbon nano. And when we went and we filmed at the plaque, the historic plaque on the building at Rice University, we noticed right next to it was literally a sculpted brick in the wall, just one, of Saturn that was like a brick and a half away from this plaque, which was really unusual. So I'm sure there are people who are much more familiar with the symbology of hexagons, but I think for me, at least in terms of my research, it is about the tiling, using hexagons to for geofencing purposes, which is like what Uber uses the hexagons, and it's connected to the graphene and to the blocks of the blockchain. Those would be sort of my top three from my lens about impact investing.
Yeah, and if you get too focused on the symbology or the numerology or whatever, that's energy that you're not putting into like what Allison's doing. It's like here's this, you know, research institute, and here's what they're doing, and these are the policies that they're creating, and then also like other people just kind of look at you like, oh, okay, whatever, like, but it's hard to argue with like, hey, like look at this white paper. By the way, somebody did ask if you have any like specific white papers that you would recommend that you thought were must reads.
I mean, maybe I can put one below. Like, I think the NTT digital twin one is really important, and the Moonshot Gold project about the cyborg avatar capitalism. Like, to me at this point, you know, even like we can't have this conversation unless we understand that the intention is that we live as avatars, literally, like, and how that's going to happen. And that's through the impact space and through the geofencing. So to me, those two papers are actually really compelling. If people are like, that sounds ridiculous, and I'm like, but it's real, or at least this is what people in power think that they're doing. So we should pay attention. So we can put links to those in the description.
Okay. And someone asked, what movement did you say was separating the youth from elders? You had mentioned a movement earlier on.
Oh, like the Extinction Rebellion, like the Greta. I mean, that was a very specific choice of the individual chose to represent that movement. Was again, not necessarily the girl her, but the brand. The brand that is Greta is this idea of youth empowerment to save the planet. But in reality, the save the planet version that they're selling is to encase the world in a nanotech counterfeit digital surveillance net. But people of that age don't have enough life experience to be able to parse the sophistication of what's going on. So like, I think you need an equal balance of like youthful exuberance and creativity with like measured life experience of elders. Like you need both optimally in my mind, and to sort of fragment off. And it's sort of the further extension of the identity politics. And I know in the impact investing space, youth, opportunity youth specifically are, our targets of these impact deals. So they need to be separated from their families and from their communities, and have their egos massaged so that they'll buy into it. And they're very impressionable, and it's hard.
Yeah. When I remember years ago, I learned the dangers of youth from a film called The Children of the Corn. And, you really can't trust these kids today, that's just, be careful, you guys, just be careful. No, but I think there is a history of like regimes trying to separate youth from their parents and trying to split that divide. I mean, even like going back to the Hitler youth, like you get these kids into these camps and you can indoctrinate them. And I'm sure China, like the Cultural Revolution, they had some of that as well. So, I mean, that is something.
And the residential schools. I mean, that's part of
yes.
my last blog post was like, well, how do you attempt to erase indigenous worldviews while you break up families and you take the children and you raise them and you try to create a blank slate for empire, like, so that they will serve your purpose. And that's, I'm, live not too far from Carlisle, and I went to visit, the cemetery where these, indigenous children died. Like literally they were brought there, from some of them from like Alaska, to build these buildings, like literally to build this 19th century campus that's now the center of the Army War College. Still,
yeah. Like
the hospital where a bunch of them died is a boutique hotel for the people staying at the Army War College. It's grotesque, actually, and that's why part of it is like these stories. Like we have to be willing to face what this thing is.
Yeah. When you posted a couple clips actually from an interview with Keanu Reeves and Carrie Ann Moss from the new Matrix, talking about the new Matrix, and there's a clip, if you go on Alison's YouTube channel, you can see this clip, and Keanu Reeves was talking about being on set, and there was a kid there, and hadn't seen the movie, and he was trying to explain what the movie was, and he was like, well, it's like they don't know what's real, and they're trying to figure out, what's real or not. And by the way, this was, I guess. They were promoting the Unreal Engine on this interview, I think. Is that correct?
It was like a gaming or a trailer from Unreal Engine from Epic Games that was like riffing off of the movie.
Ripping. Well, anyway, so he's telling this little girl, like, and they're trying to figure out what's real and not. And he said, and then the little girl, like, I guess as a 9-year-old, goes, who cares? Who cares if it's real or not? And then he was like, that's awesome. What a great way to view the world. Who cares if it's real or not? Isn't that an amazing, mind-blowing thing? And I'm like, like this guy's taking it, like perception from a 9-year-old. Like, a 9-year-old doesn't understand what the consequences of living in a synthetic world that's controlled by hedge funds and the military industrial complex,
No.
but he was like, oh, this child had this brilliant idea because who cares if it's real or not? Anyways, it's creepy.
Yeah, I will say I've only saw the first movie ever, and it's been a while, but someone on my Twitter feed commented that the female character who was like the skeptic, like in this interview, she was like, well, no, I actually like sitting at the kitchen table, and I like to know that it's real with real people, and so it was sort of the good cop, bad cop, but this person on my Twitter said, no, they're playing a character, like that's actually a script. Like that interview was scripted and they were meant to sort of advance that particular narrative. It wasn't just an off the cuff reel. Like they were playing their characters from the movie essentially in their interview frame, which I thought was interesting.
This is a comment. The Green Berets went to Mozambique just this past February 2021 to help fight quote unquote jihadist insurgency that sprung up in the very area where there is natural gas and business as usual. Mm-hmm. And now actually I didn't, maybe that is kind of, that might have been related to a conversation that was happening. It's hard for me when I'm going through these comments to figure out what's just the conversation or what's directed to us. But yeah, that's a whole nother, that's a bunch of other shows, all the, the military excuse for going into sending the military into countries where there just happens to be natural gas. Please speak more on the Maroon movement and what one can learn from them. Do you know what? I must have missed that.
Yeah, the Marinage, I think, is what I was.
Oh, Marinage. Yes, Marinage.
Yeah,
okay.
Yeah. So I'll have to remember to put all of these links, but so essentially these were, there was fierce resistance by enslaved people to the systems of slavery. And significantly, the Haitian Revolution, right? And in many respects, the policies of, putting Haiti into debt and decimating that country ever since the 18th century is a way of showing that that level of resistance will not be tolerated by the global empire. And that continues till today. But there was fierce resistance, violent, cultural, and then people would escape. And the people who would escape to remote areas, often swampy areas, and set up their own communities. And so that was characteristic. You can look it up, just do an online search. Specifically in the United States, the Dismal Swamp in North Carolina and Virginia was a center of Maroon culture, and then also parts of Florida. And I remember being in a meeting with someone, because it was so compelling, and he actually shared an article by someone. His name is, I believe, Russell. He goes by Russell Maroon Shoats, Shoats, and he is a political prisoner in Pennsylvania. He was a Black Panther in the 70s. He was incarcerated, I think, for the killing of a policeman in the 70s, and wrote extensively and has a very compelling article about the true resistance to slavery, and talks a lot about Maroon culture in that. And, at this meeting, I was, I think, one of the only white people in this meeting, and, it really resonated. And this person said, we should read this article. And by the way, there were white Maroons too. And, they talked about sort of the in these swampy areas that the people who the Black community was the furthest in, and then the white community were like the intermediaries between the existing system and the communities further internally. So, to me, early on, I was like, well, there's the physical Maroon, like to separate yourself physically from the culture and then find some way to be self-sustaining outside of the system. But one of the questions I still like, and I don't know that I'll ever have an answer to, but thinking about the brain as the next battle space, when Giordano talks about that, is like, what is like Marinage, like Maroon culture for one's mind and one's spirit, right? Like, how do we protect that? Like, where's the swamp we go to for that? So anyway, I don't have a deep analysis for it, but for me, that's always really resonated, is that I'm not sure that it's a numbers game at this point. And I don't know how we'll persevere, I don't know how it's all going to play out, but it could be that some of it is just that there's like small communities that continue to preserve natural life, in the virtual swamps. That resistance, like that, I think that's the thing that we need to carry forward, is that in these narratives of both, indigenous genocide and enslavement, that there was tremendous physical and spiritual resistance to all of this machine that's been rolling on for a really long time, maybe just not including all of us now. And that I think we have a lot to learn from those communities.
Okay. Do you think this is a cover-up for years of dumping forever chemicals in our water supply, a way to reframe their solution as benevolence? And I'll read one more. Do you think this is? I just put that question up there twice. Someone said there's a new movie called Free Guy that uses something like Codex. All the movies warming us up to it. And I put this up here because, and then the James Bond, I guess, had a graphene programmable virus in it, the new James Bond. It's everywhere now. And it is actually interesting because you will see, like in movies and Hollywood movies, that predictive programming and, like planting seeds and putting ideas out there. There's a lot of that, actually. I don't know if you want to address those two things.
Yeah. Oh gosh, wait a minute. What did you say right before?
The first one had to do with, is this a cover up for putting forever chemicals in?
Oh, the chemicals. Yeah. Well, I would say, based on reading Alana's work, is that if you understand, and others, the full spectrum domination system, and that is done through, engineered chemicals, and in weaponization of frequency, that what's coming, I don't think it was an accident. I don't think it's about them. I mean, they're always interested in making a solution that, create a problem, then offer the solution. And that is part of it. I don't mean to say that's none of it, but I think that the war on natural life has started early on, and it wasn't by accident, it was intentional. And I know that within the research space around aluminum, particulates and that sort of thing, and Alcoa, that a lot of it is about sort of killing soil culture and things to sort of push this hydroponics and aeroponics. So, and even within the the chronic illness and the spectrum disorder predilection, that I don't think it was an accident. I think it was part of the design system towards this post-human frame. So these folks have very long time horizon, and of using chemical experimentation. And I would say a book that I would recommend for people, I keep promising a book list, but one that really influenced me was How to Hide an Empire, Daniel Immerwahr's How to Hide an Empire. And it was about territories, but there was a big section on Puerto Rico and Cornelius Rhodes, and he did terrible things to people in Puerto Rico. But then he dropped chemical weapons, tested them in Central America during World War II. He was the head of chemical warfare, and then they used that data analytics to create chemotherapy later. So they're always the chemical industry is so dark. It's really, really dark, and I think there's always dual uses on all of this stuff operating.
Yeah. Someone said, can you speed up your mythology project and Pegasus?
I know. I'm working the next one. I'm trying to do Department of Energy and Helios, but I also have a quilt I'm working on, so I have to balance it out.
So this person said they heard you once say, I heard Allison once say she was a WASP as in belief. I'm not familiar with that. Would you elaborate? I don't.
Oh yeah, it's just white Anglo-Saxon Protestant. I mean, I think it's about cultural appropriation. I think this idea, you have to own who you are in the machine and the equation. I grew up not super religious, but kind of Presbyterian Methodist. I am a white Anglo-Saxon Protestant. Within that, and that goes way back, that characterization. But I'm me. I can't try to be other than me, in this thing. But I can try to critically reflect on the role that I play in the machine. And none of us individually can fix the whole thing, right? But you have to actually have some self-awareness of where you are in it.
Yeah, I'm kind of torn on that because on one hand, it's like I'm supposed to identify as this white male thing, but it's also been weaponized and it's also used um, for nefarious reasons. So it's not a lot of times when it comes to the nonprofits or political parties, it's not about coming to an understanding of like this history or whatever. It's about um, it's about something else, I think. And so, like, I don't like. I'm just a little reluctant to identify. I mean, the white thing is a manufactured thing, anyways, and so somehow I'm supposed to, um, you know, I'm guilty for all the crimes of, white people everywhere, and it's just I don't know. I have a little bit of an issue with that where I mean I spend my whole life like raising awareness of this horrendous history, but I just the identity politics I just have a real problem with. I don't think it's actually very useful. But I can still acknowledge as a white male, privileges that I have in society, and I can still do that without without feeding into this political thing that I have a real problem with. But anyway, that's another conversation that would probably start some fights, which actually has, even in my life. So someone mentioned the metaverse. It's like the internet, and they were asking about how Facebook's metaverse, ties in with the metaverse. And I think that's a lot of people don't understand or didn't understand when they had made that announcement that the metaverse is much, much, much bigger than Facebook. Facebook will play a role within that, but the idea is that these different companies will play their role in it, but they want it to be interoperable, where you have a digital identity, and you can move around. You can go into Facebook, and then you can go into Google's or whoever's others, their little worlds, but they're all connected, where you can like jump from one to another. But do you want to say anything about the metaverse and Facebook and like their new the announcement that they made of the name change, Meta and all that?
Yeah. Well, I would say like sometimes it's about managing the narrative. It's always about managing the narrative. And so I think in some ways it's like if people think like, oh, the metaverse equals Facebook, it's simpler. And then people don't get the whole expanse of it. So, I mean, I think to me, I understand the metaverse as being a mix of both like full on virtual reality as well as the mixed reality and the spatial web. And to me, at least at the present time, I feel like the spatial web part of that is actually more concerning than the virtual world. Is like, that's not great, but most people at this point have a choice of whether or not they're participating in virtual world building. But the mixed reality with the spatial web smart contracts on the world, probably layered in with Niantic, which is backed by the CIA, that's the thing that's really going to control our lives. And to my way of thinking, if you understand it as the spatial web, even like the programmable money, right? All of the stuff that I'm talking about on blockchain would be part of this game. And so I think if you can sort of package it up and say, oh, Facebook's doing the metaverse, people don't grasp the true scope of what's going on, and like the nature of digital twinning, the Japan Moonshot project. Like, imagine if all of a sudden, instead of talking about the Facebook metaverse, people were actually looking at the Moonshot project, right? And NTT and what that meant and why our Department of Energy was working on to create digital twinning. Like, that would be a higher level conversation than framing it around social media, video gaming, and like avatars. I think it would take it outside of a space that as much as people use it as still somewhat trivialized as like an add-on to life. Say like, no, like literally we're talking about remaking life as a digital simulation, and what does that mean? So that's sort of my take. I mean, I think it has helped some people, Jason, like you said, that you had some people that my work started to crystallize more once they saw that metaverse video, because they could picture it. And I think in that way it's useful. But I would caution people not to just, like you said, equate Facebook with the metaverse, because it's much, much bigger. And it's like porting around all of these different digital spaces. And I think when we went back and we were, a few months ago, the IMF was talking about, needing a secure sign-on to the internet. That was for the metaverse, right? Like, they need you to have a secure sign-on, not to like make sure that you're not saying things you're not supposed to say on the internet. They need you to have a secure sign-on so that your digital twin is linked to your blockchain identity payment system, so that you can live as an avatar across these digital platforms. That's what that is. That's what that is. So it's so much bigger.
So, actually, this someone said Jim Thorpe was my first boyhood hero, sports hero. And he was actually in the Carlisle Indian School. He was, if you guys don't know who Jim Thorpe, he was a football star, and actually he like played lots of different sports. He was kind of interesting. I actually stopped in the little town where he was from, and they had like a statue and everything. I travel around a lot, and I just was like, I go into town, and I'm like, oh, what's interesting in this town? And they had a big Jim Thorpe. I think it was actually where he was buried. I can't remember the town. I think it was in Pennsylvania, though.
I think they like warred over getting his remains. I think it's a little controversial.
We have that here in Colorado. We have Buffalo Bill's grave, and then I guess there's somewhere else, maybe in Canada, where this claiming that his body is. So that's pretty funny. But is his story known in Philadelphia amongst the youth? Jim Thorpe. Do people know who he is? Probably not.
I don't know. I mean, I don't think it's well known for sure. But I mean, in some ways, again, that's part of the mythology too. Like, he was an incredibly talented athlete, right? But he was, that team, was set up to sort of lift up the progress, right? Like, look at the achievement of these youth, right? Under the right conditions, they can become this amazing football team, right? And, so for me, it's he has this legacy, but it's also embedded in, like, telling the story of this American achievement, which in some ways I think obscures the reality of the situation of most of the kids that were in that school.
Right. And it's we see that even with like Black youth,
like,
you're acceptable if you become a good sports figure, and that's the role that we've
honor him for sure, as an individial, but then how his story is used in a grander narrative arc.
One, even his life, like, even though he was this big hero, he's still dealt with a lot of BS. So it's you should look him up. It's a pretty interesting story. I think they even made a movie about him back. Okay. Someone asked if you've seen the movie Network. Great movie if you haven't seen it. Written by Patty Chayefsky. Have you seen Network?
I think a long time ago.
It's really amazing film. Like, but there's this great scene where I can't remember. Ned Beatty is like in the boardroom, and he's talking about, you've meddled with the forces of nature. He's like talking about the corporate. He's like, but he said in the movie, they even said there are no nation states. There's only the corporation, and so it's actually really a prophetic. I mean, when you're thinking about this was 1970, I think it came out in 1976. But if you guys haven't seen it, Network is phenomenal film. Any thoughts on weather modification, weaponization, i.e., recent tornadoes? I don't know if that's something you want to touch on, but
I mean, I feel like it's something to be considered. I mean, that's a lot of what Alana has focused on, and
it's clear that it's clear that they're doing it. I mean, that's just the evidence is. I
mean, I would say, like, it's hard because I think it's a lot of the weather modifications are meant to drive the climate narrative. Which, again, my position is that we're causing all sorts of environmental harm. It's just the nature of the harm that's being done isn't as it's being characterized. And so, someone tweeted that they had a family member that was in the vicinity of these storms, and they were very worried about them. And they said something like, you climate change, terrible people, like, it's your fault, And that's so hard because I think, like, unless you're introduced to the idea that, like, weather modification has dated back to the 40s and 50s, and that literally, like, I shared a link, I said, I'm really sorry that happened to you and your family, but you actually have to understand these other forces that are in play in terms of weaponizing the atmosphere. And I'm like, here's a link from the State Department about Operation Popeye, which was weather modification used in Vietnam War for strategic purposes. And so I think part of this comes down to the weather, and even in my family, like, that's probably the thing that causes the most tension. But to accomplish their policy aims, these powerful individuals will use whatever tools are at their disposal, including, I had someone that I knew once who said, they rule from the air, and that can be frequencies, that can be satellites, that can be the weather. And I think a lot of people would imagine that, like, they would never be a victim of state violence, right? Like they would like, it's hard to imagine for a lot of people that they would be a target of state violence in whatever form. And that's why I keep saying that I think the appropriate frame for what we're talking about is around the indigenous genocide. Because, like, if once you understand what we're capable of, like what the country is actually built on, and enslavement, but that then the reality that because of the economic imperative of what's coming and the transformation that's coming, that we are all now the targets, starts to make more sense.
So someone asked, was James Giordano lying that all this tech has only been around for 30 years?
I don't know. I mean, I don't have any specific like insider information. There's no way for me. I'll like mostly go on as what people say, and then like.
Well, I know with graphene, they claim that it was discovered in 2014.
Yeah, well, I know that graphene, like, my friend who has been doing research, like that research is probably dates to at least the late 50s or early 60s. So yeah, it depends on what you call like this technology. Yeah, I mean, a lot of it is, you can't patent it because it's top secret and classified. So it's hard to say. It's really hard to say what the, for me, the history is interesting. Like spending some time really looking into like the history of robotic development in Japan was like quite fascinating to look back into the 1960s, looking back at animatronics and Disney, like, a lot of these robotics that like are theme park robots. Like the history of it gets a little intense when you actually start to look at like where they came from, right? Like mercenary Pirates of the Caribbean or whatever. Like it's the haunted house. Like I remember going to Disneyland and like being in the haunted house ride. And it's totally different now that like when you start to imagine like simulation technology and animatronics and holograms, it feels very different. But yeah, I don't know any particular insider information on the nature of the technology. All I will say is that, Alana talks about the Jasons, and the scientists, and, there's a whole lot we don't know.
Yeah.
That's not no.
On the animatronics, when I was a kid, I used to go to there was a Showbiz Pizza, which was like a better version of Chuck E. Cheese pizza. It was actually pretty cool, but I was like mesmerized. They had the Rockafire Express, and I was actually quite mesmerized by those robots. So someone mentioned Jay-Z is into social impact investing, and they said we in the Black community could use this dialogue to outline the insidious Trojan horses of Silicon Valley. And there was a lot of discussion on this about filmmakers and artists and their role in all of this. And as being spokesperson and also investors in this, but do you want to say anything about that?
Well, I've talked, I think, before about like solutions journalism, and it's also the arts community. And when I talked with someone today who was in like a much smaller, like independent space around film, but talking about like the arts, I said, to me, one of the things that is like the most heart-wrenching is beyond the impact markets around housing and hunger and education and addiction and all of these other things, is like looking at what's happening with the arts and culture, because really this stuff they want to get on blockchain and parasitize the culture and the mind and the spirit. And and a lot of that co-optation, especially like of the Black community, of Black culture, has been happening for decades. And now like this is a whole nother version of it, like that energetic connection is being mined. And to control arts and culture for impact investment purposes is really troubling to me. I mean, to think about like the propaganda, but as I said the last time, the idea of like frameworks and social mobilization of like getting people in their emotional states and then gradually moving them to where you want, in ways that like with AI and over long time horizons, you may not even be aware that's happening to you. Like that's really deep. I would say in the EdTech space and in the charter school space, there are quite a few both prominent Black people in Black entertainment, also prominent athletes who are going into charter schools, which ultimately are sort of the break, ultimately they're coming after kids, but are being used to embed the blended learning and these alternate sort of states of exception in terms of educational practice. And oftentimes it's framed as like, hey, we care about you. Like, look at us. We care about our community. So we're the people who know best. But they've bought the managerial class. They've bought the entertainers. They've bought the spokespeople. Like, this has been planned out so far in advance. Like, they've groomed them. And that's what I talk about when we went to KIPP charter schools in Houston, is that they can cherry pick the people who will be the spokespeople from early ages and bring them up in the system and not really give them opportunities to think outside of that box, and to reward them for it, and then to provide them scholarships, and then to get them to be the face of humane AI. Or, MIT has a whole program called Data for Black Lives, as if we had more data, we would solve structural racism. Like, the war machine is asking for more data so they can solve structural racism. Like, that's not right. Like, that isn't ever going to happen if you stop and think about it logically. But there's the identity politics piece, and then there's that people just don't understand the machine. They don't understand the game. If they understood the game, if everybody, on this call, I don't know, however, 12 people, whoever's left, but could pressure people with bigger platforms to talk about it, we could understand the game and we could start to deconstruct it. So I'm hoping, actually, in January, I talked with my friend Zakiya, and we've had a number of really solid conversations. Zakiya Sankara Jabbar, and her audience is coming from a more of a Black radical politics space, about this blockchain program in Miami that's rolling out, which is targeting Little Haiti specifically, and using this community currency tied to sort of volunteerism and education and litter cleanup. And I don't know, it's hard because they are taking true and authentic harms and then using people that have brand recognition to then repackage those harms and sell you fixes that aren't going to fix the problem, that are just going to make the problem worse and different.
Okay, well, you won't believe this, but I've actually caught up on the questions. I have one more.
Oh, okay.
It's been a good run. This is awesome.
Yeah.
Thank you guys all for, I guess you want to see me, don't you? I want to thank everyone who's been participating in this discussion, and it hasn't been too bad. There's a couple people I had to take out, but it's been pretty good.
The slander.
I know I left that up there. I just wanted to clarify that. I didn't delete that, guys. So what's up with charter schools and STEM? It seems like in Black communities, charter schools seem like more autonomy, but then big NGOs come in and manufacture the curriculum with STEM. So do you want to respond to that?
Yeah, well, I mean, this comes, a lot when I was doing my work. And again, this has been, for the past 8 years. And then at that point, looking backwards, if you know that the goal is to build a metaverse, they need someone to code it, right? If you know the future is post-human, you need people to manage synthetic biology. And so you need different classes of people. You need the people who are the theoreticians, and then you need the technicians. And this is a whole new space. It's a whole new, it's not brand new, but to scale it, to focus on that, the synthetic biology, the alternative energy, the metaverse, and then all of the impact markets are things that they need to bring people into. And this is not just in the US, this is global. This is running through the OECD and UNESCO and the UN. So the emphasis of STEM, and now STEAM, which you add arts, which is the A, so STEM to STEAM, is the same playbook all over the world, because they need the kids to have the skills to do the thing that they're going to force them into doing. And so charter schools offer the sense of more autonomy. And that's the thing, as someone who had been a public school advocate, a neighborhood school, is that charter schools would get much more leeway than the neighborhood schools. And then they were able to seek outside additional funding, which is an added benefit, because the public schools were intentionally starved of resources, just like, that came up in the Greenwald thing, that the precondition for the public-private partnerships and the impact investments is austerity. The public schools are starved, they're dysfunctional, they have lots of rules. The charter schools are states of exception. So then they can try out new and seemingly more creative things and go after more funding. And then that is where the impact investors come in. But the goal was always to get the kids to do the thing, which is to build this next metaverse. And then increasingly in Philadelphia, what we saw was that the charter school, and they were generally franchised. So early on in the early iteration of charter schools in Philadelphia, that you had like one-offs, like sort of like, you know, the Spanish immersion school or the Waldorf school or this. But then ultimately it really shifted to franchise programs. And so like mastery charter schools, there were these larger schools that managed, you know, a dozen different schools, and they had feeder schools and whole internal networks. They were not just boutique, you know, schools at that point. And then once the franchises got set, then they started to get contracts to manage the public schools. So then they boomeranged back. So they're like, oh, look, we have an evidence-based approach. So like now the school district's going to hire their consultants to run the public schools. And then it was going back and forth. So, you know, early on, and I lost track of the paper, but I read a document that really was chilling for me, because it's not just the charter schools, it's also the after school programs and the out of school time learning programs. That's where the badges are going to be. Like what they said was that in those spaces, they could get more data, they could push more technology than they could get into the public schools. And that ultimately their goal was to make parents afraid to send their children to the public schools. And my thought was at the time was that because they'd had all these school closures, was that being afraid meant that children would have to cross over neighborhoods that they felt unsafe, like in getting to school, like crossing over, you know, in gang areas or something, that the children would literally feel unsafe getting into school. But what I'm realizing is that, you know, the austerity and the violence that is in the schools and the stress and the anxiety, and now added to the biosurveillance state, was that it wasn't necessarily the exterior threats of feeling unsafe. Now it's actually feeling unsafe in your building. And so at that point, and I'm not saying that it's not authentic or like legitimate concerns, those families would just say, I'm pulling my kids out. Like, you know, if we can, I'm leaving the system. The system is harming my children. Then they would go to homeschooling, and like beyond the charter schools, they would have virtual charter schools, which were online, which is more data mining. You know, and people would imagine that that's homeschooling because you're doing online school at home, but it's really a different system than a traditional homeschooling model. And then ultimately, I've talked about in the past about the digital badges, is that once you have the QR code, performance indicator collection in all the libraries and climbing walls, and, you know, chorus groups, and every single community asset that you have is like got a QR code attached to it, and data analytics going back, that you've lost the whole commons. The whole commons is gone. So like I can understand that certain communities that feel intentionally harmed, which that harm is real, would feel like, get us out of here. We know how to better take care of our children. But once you start to look at like the backup things are going to embed the Boys and Girls Clubs, the YMCAs, and even the churches. Like, I mean, I don't think any of us would want to see a day where education means kids sitting in a church basement with a Chromebook and AmeriCorps, making sure that kids don't beat each other up as they get enough social emotional learning data on them, and then train them to be the coders and the synthetic biology technicians and the people running, you know, whatever that passes as the next version of solar panels. But that's where I think it could go.
Great. So yeah, that was a good run. Thank you guys, and thank you, Allison. Yeah, so on to 2022. Holy cow. But we'll be doing more stuff in the coming year. But yeah, keep on keeping on. Thank you, Allison, and thank you all for joining us.
And Jason, thank you for coming out. Like, I have to say, like, you know, this is our closing of this sort of episode of featuring these 5 hours of, you know, Jason and I talking about the fourth industrial revolution, when, you know, in May of 2020, when like not many people were even talking about the fourth industrial revolution. You know, it's kind of crazy to look back, but when you were like, I think I should drive out from Denver to film you talking about this, and I'm like, you're crazy, but you are right, because people, I mean, this is, you know, as much as I can write my little blogs, like listening to people or having the film connection does make a difference. And I know I really appreciate your production quality and all the time and effort you put into it. So
yeah, I'm critical of my production quality, but I try. I it's not perfect.
You
but
do a good job. We appreciate it.
I definitely try. Well, and it's funny because like at that time, as far as me coming out to Philly, I drive out to Philly, probably at least once a year it seems like, or at least once every couple of years because of my work with Sherry Honkala. So it's something I'm used to doing anyways, but I, basically had seen your talk and I knew like a lot of the stuff clicked and it connected with other research that I'd been doing for a long time, but you were connecting a lot of dots for me. But it was just the presentation itself was terrible. And like literally, like in order for me to look at the slides, I kept having to pause the video because you're talking and there would be a slide on the screen. It'd be on the screen for like 2 seconds. It'd be like, boop, here's a slide. I'm going to take it away from you now. You can't look at it. And so I was like, oh my gosh, this is awful. But I knew the information was really important. So, but even that interview, like I wasn't like as knowledgeable about all this stuff. Like it was all new, impact investing and all that stuff was new to me. So like a lot of the questions I asked, I don't know, I don't know if they're the best questions or not. I also had an issue with my microphone. I was holding my microphone. It was making a lot of noise. I've since solved that problem. I have a thing to deal with that. But anyways, it's a process, but I'm honored to help promote this work because I know you're doing really important work, and I'm hoping that more people catch on because this thing's coming fast, and people really don't understand the significance of living in this world that they're planning for us to live in, and hopefully we'll just keep doing what we're doing and yeah. And all you guys that are watching, you guys are part of this too. We need to be united against blockchain and impact investing. But
be a coherent thinker.
Well,
and go out and take a walk in nature every once in a while. Get some rocks.
Well, and I think, and when I've talked about this a little bit before, but like I think those of us who were already, at least myself, like who already had like serious problems with capitalism and even markets as being the driving force for human relations, come at this from a different place than someone who's like comes from like the Austrian school of economics or something. So, at the beginning, it was just kind of like, even me, I was like, oh, we just need to bring people in. I was like, oh, wait, there actually are some significant differences in how we view the problem and what we want to accomplish, and that the general idea that this is a war on life itself is it really drives home for me, because if you stop and think about it, I'm questioning everything about like technology, and everybody brings up the Luddite thing, which is funny because the Luddites weren't actually Luddites. They really just wanted jobs. They were destroying the machines because they were taking their jobs, not because they were against the machines. If they had a UBI, the Luddites would have been fine. But I actually am becoming, a little bit more like anti-tech to some extent, even though I'm like immersed in tech. But I do think we need to start having more conversations about how far do we go with this, and we're those conversations just aren't being had in terms of, okay, we're having to extract these minerals and we're having to exploit this labor, and how much of this is worth it. I don't have the answer to that necessarily. I'm not anti-tech or anything, but I think there's a lot of conversations that aren't happening that need to happen. So anyway, thank you. Well, I'm going to close it down.